Chapter 194, originally Chapter 637. I need to get this done quickly. Mr. Weasley finally believed Ginny's story, not because he fully trusted Harry, but because he'd seen Harry and Ginny behaving far too familiarly around the burrow on countless occasions. They'd been cozy together even when the entire family was watching. And knowing there was a big match about to start, with Professor McGonagall looking on, Mr. Weasley didn't dare make a scene. So he marched Harry into the tent himself, face drawn and stern. Inside, the same three figures stood exactly where Harry had left them, each keeping a respectful distance. Fleur Delacour sat on a small wooden stool in one corner, looking completely at ease, almost as if she'd wandered in from a countryside picnic. Victor Krum and Elvis, by contrast, looked anything but relaxed. Krum's shoulders were hunched, and his anxious frown deepened every time he glanced at the tent entrance. The moment Harry stepped in, Krum broke away and hurried over. "Finally," he said, his voice equal parts relief and impatience. His tense expression softened a little. Elvis, who'd been pacing in the far corner, simply stopped and stared. He didn't launch into one of his usual riddling welcomes. Instead, he let out a low murmur. "Harry's here. It's starting now." Then he resumed his pacing, as restless as ever. Harry took a steadying breath. The match, and whatever lay beyond, was about to begin. Harry couldn't help but think that if Ron were here, he'd already be snickering and saying something like, "Just wait till Elvis hears this." "All right, everyone. Time's running out," Mr. Weasley said, scratching at the back of his head. "What we're doing today, well, if I hadn't seen the power of your group magic during the team tournament, I'd honestly think I'd lost my marbles. So here's the plan. We're going to subdue fire dragons, 4 of them in total, and I've brought their models along." He produced a small purple silk pouch and gave it a sharp shake. "You'll choose in the order your schools finished in the last tournament." Harry was practically itching to get started. Victor Krum and Elva sat frozen, faces blank. It looked as though the mere thought of opening their mouths might make them sick. Then Fleur brushed a stray curl from her face, arched an eyebrow, and said coolly, "Can we just get on with it? It's only fire dragons, after all." Her words were a touch blunt, but on her they sounded more charming than rude. Mr. Weasley only smiled and gave a quick nod before he hurriedly untied the pouch, revealing the first dragon model. 4 small, lifelike dragon figurines lay on the table at the center of the tent. Each one flexed its intricately sculpted wings and bared tiny, razor-sharp fangs. Mr. Weasley, acting as referee, cleared his throat. "Harry, choose first." Harry's eyes swept over the beast before him. Without hesitation, he reached out and lifted the Hungarian tree spike, the fiercest of the 4, its bronze scales bristling with spikes. "Harry, are you sure?" Victor Krum asked, concern flickering in his dark eyes. Mr. Weasley glanced nervously between them but said nothing, honoring his role. Harry held the model aloft, meeting Krum's gaze. "Yes, it's the most dangerous, I know, but remember our task, to subdue a fire dragon. What looks like a disadvantage now could become my greatest asset later." Satisfied, Krum stepped forward. "All right, I'll take the Hebride's black dragon, then, the most aggressive of the remaining 3. He lifted the coal-black figurine, its bat-like wings outstretched and eyes glowing with faint purple menace. Fleur Delacour tapped her slim fingers on the table, a playful smile on her lips. "You're taking your time, boys. This beauty is obviously mine." She swept up the Australian egg-white eye, its pearl-like scales shimmering in the tense light, its pupilless eyes swirling with iridescent color. Even so, the exquisite dragon could not outshine Fleur herself. Her graceful poise and radiant presence made everything else seem to fade into the back row, and even Elva's, who'd been dreading the fastest and deadliest of the lot, the Peruvian viper-tooth, actually blinked in surprise when the little brass-colored dragon token sailed into his palm. With his future sight gift, that blink stretched into a heartbeat of stunned delight. "Then this one's mine," he said quietly, examining the gleaming miniature. "The Peruvian viper-tooth." "All right, everyone's drawn," Mr. Weasley announced, stepping forward with a grin. "Each model corresponds to the dragon you'll face, and your drawing order is your combat order. Clear?" A chorus of assent rippled through the tent. "Splendid. I'm off to explain the live broadcast to the audience and to finalize the protective enchantments. Once you step onto the field, you'll benefit from our group magic." Harry, you're up first. No hesitation the moment you hear the whistle. Understood? And Harry, do be careful." With a last encouraging nod, Mr. Weasley slipped out of the tent, leaving just 4 competitors behind. Crumb was the first to break the silence. He set his rattling Hebridean black model on a stool and frowned at the tent flap. "They said this would be broadcast live," he muttered. "Why haven't we seen anything yet?" He was clearly trying to distract himself and everyone else from the nerves knotting in his stomach. But the tension in the small space was unmistakable. Soon enough, each of them would have to face a real dragon. In the furthest corner of the tent, Elvas raised a gloved hand and pointed upward. Perched on an invisible line of sight was a small golden sphere, its delicate silver wings unmoving but impossibly poised for flight, the golden snitch. Yet to Harry's amazement, there was no faint buzzing of wing beats he knew so well. Harry narrowed his eyes. "You really expect us to rely on this gadget, and all that I just shouted at the judges has been broadcast to the entire nation?" Fleur Delacour stepped forward, a triumphant curl at the corner of her mouth. "Don't be so quick to dismiss it," she said. "This little thing is nothing short of brilliant." She exchanged a glance with Ryan, the young inventor whose skill had brought Fleur's concept to life. "You'll see." Harry studied the hovering snitch again, still mystified by its silent suspension. But before he could press the point, a hush fell over the assembled crowd, an almost reverent pause that signaled something extraordinary was about to happen. Across London, at the Leaky Cauldron, old Tom wiped down the bar one last time before setting his rag aside. The tavern's anxious patrons turned toward the enchanted television screen above the fireplace. As the image of the glittering tent and the floating snitch flickered into view, old Tom raised his mug. "To Harry Potter!" he cried. Instantly, every goblet and glass in the room chimed together, and the gathered witches and wizards offered a heartfelt cheer. In the Weasley kitchen at the Burrow, Mrs. Weasley clutched her teacup so tightly that the fine porcelain threatened to crack. Her eyes darted between the screen and her husband, whose own gaze was locked on the unfolding spectacle. "A duel with a dragon," she whispered, breathless. "And Arthur. He told them everything, every detail." Arthur Weasley only nodded, his face a mixture of pride and worry. "Harry's a good lad," he said softly. "He'll do us proud." High above the Atlantic waves, the grand city of Atlantis unfurled beneath an enchanted globe of light. The same broadcast that filled the Leaky Cauldron and the Burrow spanned the sky, so that every Atlantis wizard could see the contest in real time. "That's Harry Potter!" someone shouted from a floating pavilion. "Our champion!" Another cried, "Show them what Atlantis magic can do." Encouraging cheers rippled through the air as families huddled around crystal screens, pennants of Atlantis fluttering overhead. Back in the arena tent, Harry checked his watch. Only moments remained before the next stage of the challenge began. He inhaled deeply, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline. Fleur gave him a nod of confidence. Ryan adjusted a dial on a nearby control panel, and Elvis, face unreadable, awaited the signal. Silence fell. Then, with a soft hum, the snitch's silver wings sprang to life. It darted into the air, golden form gleaming under the tent's lanterns. Harry Potter squared his shoulders. The duel had begun. 5 minutes remained until the Popeye transfiguration. A sharp whistle sliced through the air. Harry pushed aside the tent flap and stepped out, his pulse quickening even as he forced himself to stay calm. He threaded through a gap in the wooden fence and emerged into the arena. Hundreds of spectators stared down from the stands, their faces alight with expectation. 3 spotlights, emerald, crimson, and sapphire, traced over him, and for a moment his pupils vanished, replaced by an eerie white glare. From the judge's platform, Professor Snape's lips curled in a mocking sneer. An invisible force rippled around Harry, gathering into a shimmering purple aura above his head. His muscles bulged, tearing the fabric of his robes until only a pair of shorts remained. Beneath his ribs, a vortex of green energy spun like a living storm. His body felt weightless, as though gravity itself had let go. He glanced at the giant clock suspended over the field. 3 minutes to go. He took a steadying breath and muttered under his breath, "No time to waste. I've got to finish this quickly." Across the arena, the Hungarian tree spear loomed, its gnarled, thorn-covered trunk etched with glowing runes, standing as the ultimate test of his transfiguration skills. Harry squared his shoulders, ready to prove himself. Chapter 638, Less Than a Minute. The instant Harry began to pull off his robe, the stadium erupted. Woohoo! Our magic's about to explode. Go on, Beauxbatons. Get off the pitch, Potter. We want the Beauxbatons champions. We don't need you, Potter. In their excitement, they'd forgotten one crucial detail. This was being broadcast live. At Ryan's command, dozens of enchanted golden snitches hovered overhead, each equipped with a tiny camera. They swooped in close, streaming every leap, every twist, every bare shoulder straight to millions of viewers. At home, countless parents yanked their robes tighter as they caught sight of Harry's unclothed torso on their living room screens. "What on earth is he doing?" one father muttered, reaching for his wand. "Better practice and embarrass me curse on my own kids," his wife grumbled. Others began debating whether it was time to stock up on protective potions, or perhaps a loud trumpet solo would do the trick to restore some decorum. Back in the stands, not everyone was a proud parent. Boys sitting beside their girlfriends were bright red. "Angie, don't look." "Judges, can't you give Potter something to wear?" "Turn it off, it's indecent." Ron Weasley ducked behind his scarf. Draco Malfoy shielded his eyes with one gloved hand. Even Neville Longbottom, caught in an awkward moment with Hannah Abbott, hastily spun her around. Meanwhile, on the pitch, Harry froze, robe half removed, as the commentators caught their breath. The golden snitch's lenses zoomed in for an extreme close-up. With less than a minute to go, Harry squared his shoulders and braced himself. Whatever happened next would change everything. For most witches in the audience, it was a once-in-a-lifetime spectacle. Imagine the heroes of your favorite childhood stories, handsome, powerful, and shirtless, materializing right before your eyes. Enthusiasm rippled through the crowd. "Wow, he's even hotter in person. Is Harry Potter really that strong? I wish I were Ginny. Weasley's only a second year. Can someone let me go up there?" Near the front, Ginny Weasley beamed. In this world, she'd made a point of collecting admirers, both boys and girls alike, just to catch Harry's eye. Now that her latest girlfriend was standing exposed by her side, Ginny merely raised an eyebrow and watched the scene play out, pride shining in her eyes. Only once did she blush, as she turned apologetically to her classmates. "Okay, that bit about Harry's Norwegian Ridgeback tattoo? Total fabrication. Sorry." Despite the crowd's squeals and sidelong glances at Harry, he himself paid no heed to any of it. His full attention was locked on the creature before him. The Hungarian horntail. It crouched low, wings half folded in a predatory stance, ready to spring into the sky. Its scales glimmered obsidian black, and its vicious yellow eyes never left Harry. Here stood a colossal, lizard-like beast, fearsome, magnificent, and utterly intent on its small, wand-wielding opponent. Harry watched the Norwegian Ridgeback coil its spiked tail and whip it across the arena floor, gouging long trenches in the stone. Calmly, he whispered into the air, 2 minutes, 49.32 seconds. Start. With that cue, he vanished in a blur. Where his feet struck, massive craters erupted one after another, each impact echoing like a miniature quake. Storm green wings shimmered beneath his ribs, converting every ounce of his power into pure, lightning-fast speed. The crowd on the stands blinked, and when they opened their eyes again, Harry was already gone, replaced only by the roar of displaced air. Across from him, the Ridgeback froze, stunned by the devastation unfolding beneath its tail. For precious seconds, it struggled to collect its wits. By the time it recovered, Harry was already upon it. In one fluid motion, he lunged forward and seized the dragon's tail at the junction where thorn met scale. The Ridgeback roared in fury and thrust open its jaws, unleashing a 50-foot jet of searing flame. But Harry, seizing the tail like a lever, tugged it skyward. The dragon lost its balance, its massive form suddenly weightless. With a final thunderous crack, it toppled backward, crashing to the ground as gravity reclaimed its hold. Silence fell over the arena, then erupted into cheers. Harry stood, breathing hard, the severed roar of applause washing over him as the Ridgeback lay defeated at his feet. Harry ducked his head, recalling Fred and George's cheeky catchphrase back at the Burrow, the goblin method for getting the opponents out, spin 'em in circles. Now, he was about to test it on a full-grown Hungarian horntail. With one hand, he seized the dragon's neck where its spines met its scales. With the other, he gripped the tip of its tail. Then he pivoted on his heel and began to whirl the creature overhead. The horntail shrieked and thrashed, its wings beating the air so hard they formed a ring of fire. Harry felt the heat press against his face, even from a distance, but he held on tight. At the peak of the spin, he lofted the dragon high and let go. The creature crashed down onto the packed earth below with a thunderous boom. Pebbles and grit exploded outward in every direction. Clouds of dust billowed across the arena. Students in the front rows coughed as ash settled over their robes. A few unlucky onlookers bore small cuts where stray rocks clipped their heads. Up in the stands, the 5 judges, seated on gilded thrones, hovered in mid-gasp. When the haze finally cleared, the crowd could see the impact had gouged a crater fully 30 feet long into the ground. Whispers rippled through the audience. No one had ever seen such force or such raw control over a dragon in a first task before. Harry straightened his posture, wand at the ready, eyes fixed on the still rumbling pit. He'd proven that a bit of burrow ingenuity, combined with nerves of steel, could take even a Hungarian horntail by surprise. And as cheers began to rise, he allowed himself the tiniest determined smile. The shallow groove under Harry's feet was a perfect spiral. The one beneath the Hungarian horntail was jagged and nearly oval. Bronze spikes studding the dragon's coal-black scales had been sheared off by the force of his blow. Yet even after such a punishing strike, the beast shook its head defiantly and staggered to its feet. Just as Harry braced himself to move in again, Hagrid thundered onto the arena floor through the main gate. "Harry, he's given up!" Harry watched as the dragon lowered its fierce helm-like head and, to his astonishment, nuzzled Hagrid's shoulder as if greeting an old friend. A team of dragon handlers surged forward, encircling the horntail. With swift flicks of their wands, they produced thick, wrist-sized bandages of enchanted linen and bound the injured beast. At their command, the wrapped dragon floated serenely to a pen reinforced with stout wooden boards. Professor McGonagall arrived moments later, surveying Harry with a sharp, assessing glance. "Well done, Potter. Now head straight to the infirmary tent." Harry lifted a hand. "Wait." He sank cross-legged to the ground. A wave of hot air swirled around him as his bulging muscles contracted, his frame slimming from the overdeveloped bulk back to the sleek, athletic shape he'd had when he first entered the arena. "Time's up. You're all right now," he said, rising to his feet and stepping out of the arena. Only a few startled whispers followed in his wake. At the entrance to the second medical tent stood Madame Pomfrey, her usual composure edged with anxiety. "Dragon!" she scolded, half relieved, as she ushered Harry inside. Though the tent was divided into curtained cubicles, he found himself alone. Pomfrey inspected him swiftly, her irritation melting into astonishment. "I can't believe it," she breathed. "The only thing hurt is your robe. You're clear. Go see your score." Harry emerged to find Ginny racing toward him. She flung her arms around him like a koala. After a brief, tender moment, he accepted the fresh robe she'd brought, slipped it on, and together they made their way along the judge's walkway to the stands. Mr. Weasley was already on his feet, face alight with pride. "Incredible," he cried. "Our youngest champion has defeated the Hungarian in under a minute." He raised his wand, releasing a silvery ribbon of light that arced into a giant 10 above the arena. Dumbledore followed suit, conjuring his own brilliant 10. Madame Maxime held up a 9, drawing a ripple of boos from the crowd, and finally, Madame Volcanova scored an 8. The crowd's boos swelled into a deafening roar. Unfazed, Karkaroff lifted his wand and held it aloft. After a pregnant pause, a jet of magic burst from its tip, inscribing the number 7 in midair. Chapter 196, Rising in Adversity. Victor Karkaroff's outrageous decision to award Harry just 7 points instantly redirected the crowd's ire away from Mrs. Volcanova and squarely onto himself. Disapproving murmurs swelled into a chorus of boos as spectators shook their heads in disbelief. Beside Harry, Ginny sprang to her feet, cheeks flushed with anger. 7 points? He outwitted the most fearsome dragon in record time, and put his life on the line doing it. From a few rows back, Ron clenched his fists. "You're hopelessly biased, aren't you?" he shouted. Draco Malfoy, pale and outraged, added through gritted teeth, "My father will hear about this." Across town at the Leaky Cauldron, old Tom slammed his pewter tankard on the floor, unleashing a torrent of curses. The other patrons cheered and stamped in solidarity. Back home at the Burrow, Mrs. Weasley stormed toward the flue fireplace, wand gripped so tightly her knuckles went white. Even under the Triwizard Tournament's strict magical contract, where lethal spells were forbidden, the assembled witches and wizards couldn't keep their disapproval to themselves. They exchanged low, biting curses and muttered Karkaroff's full name as though invoking a most detested evil. In that instant, it was clear Karkaroff had not only miscalculated Harry's triumph, but had also united everyone, friends and foes alike, against him. Adversity, it seemed, was rising just as fiercely as Harry himself. Not everyone agreed that Professor Karkaroff's low score for Harry was unfair. Zacharias Smith, who hadn't been on the receiving end of criticism in some time, was quick to voice his objections. Potter's style is sloppy, more brawl than wizardry, he declared. His strength comes entirely from that group spell boost we gave him. Honestly, I'd have handled him without breaking a sweat, Karkaroff. He never finished the thought. Dudley Dursley, seated nearby, shot him a warning glare that was enough to shut him up. Ryan, however, understood exactly why Karkaroff had marked Harry down so harshly. As the old saying goes, the eunuch worries when the emperor is at ease. Karkaroff was nothing more than Grindelwald's loyal servant, and he had never forgiven his one-time star pupil, Victor Krum, for opposing the Dark Wizard's rise. Now, with Harry Potter being Dumbledore's prized champion, Grindelwald's rival's golden boy, Karkaroff seized his chance for payback. Unable to strike at Dumbledore himself, he sabotaged Harry's score instead, a petty but telling betrayal from a faithful underling. By now, the damage to the arena floor had been magically repaired. High atop the gilded judge's dais, Mr. Weasley raised his whistle once more. Its sharp note cut through the murmurs of the crowd and the low chant of the Durmstrang students, who readied their wands and began reciting their opening incantations. The second whistle sounded, and the next round of the duel was about to begin. The heavy wooden doors of the arena groaned open, and a second black dragon slithered into view. It was roughly a third smaller than the first, its deep purple eyes glinting beneath rows of razor-sharp ridges. A barbed arrow pointed from its tail, and its leathery wings resembled those of a bat. Victor Krum strode forward. 3 pale beams of magic, dimmed in comparison to the earlier attack, hurtled toward him like sluggish meteors, the combined spell of the Durmstrang students proving far weaker than before. Krum's gaze sharpened. The crescent of white in his eyes stood out like a blade, a faint violet aura shimmered over his forehead, and delicate swirls of green wind unfurled into wings at his back. A murmur rose in the stands and swelled into a roar of protest. "This is murder! Stop this unfair fight! Krum, our hero, still so calm and unshakable. It's Karkaroff's doing. Call Arthur Weasley. Send him straight to Azkaban." Whether those cries were born of admiration or outrage, Krum paid them no heed. He lifted his wand to the sky, expelling every stray thought. His focus narrowed until nothing remained, but one single intent. With his heart steady and clear, he thought, "Here comes Nimbus 2001. Not the dazzling firebolt, but the Nimbus 2001, his steadfast companion in every challenge to come." He recognized the broom at once, the Nimbus 2001 that had fought alongside him on the field. He knew that if he called, it would answer. A sudden whistling behind him made him spin around, just as the broom came swooping in from the edge of the forbidden forest. It darted into the pitch and hovered at his side, waiting for him to mount. The uproar from the crowd swelled, and even the referees, all except Karkaroff and Dumbledore, leapt to their feet. A dragon, slowly crawling toward him, drew every eye in the stadium, but he noticed none of it. The crescent moon in his eyes vanished. The glowing halo above his head shattered, and the wind wings beneath his ribs dissolved. Only one thing held his attention, his broom, his constant companion. With a measured grace, he swung his leg over the nimbus and pushed off the turf. Instantly, a gentle current of warmth rose from the bristles, as though the broom itself were welcoming him home. Every thought guided them both, and in a heartbeat he was wherever he willed himself to be. He spiraled upward so swiftly that he became nothing more than a streak against the moonlit sky. Wherever he flew, terrifying sonic booms shattered the air. He was moving at speeds far beyond a firebolt, yet both his body and his broom remained intact. At that velocity, the world outside blurred into a swirl of vibrant afterimages, but panic never touched him. This was no more daunting than another Quidditch match. Sweeping away any lingering fear alongside the earth beneath him, he returned to the element in which he thrived. Below, the dragon no longer posed a threat. All he needed to do was fly, gracefully, deliberately, just above its head. With a series of deafening cracks, he pierced the sky and reappeared 10 feet over the creature's scaly crown. Then, with a final, bone-rattling pulse of air, the dragon collapsed in a heavy thud, its purple pupils dilating as its strength ebbed away. Crumb hovered nearby, panting, the grass beneath him carved into a long concave trench by his supersonic passage. "My God, he can fly!" Arthur Weasley shouted. The crowd erupted in astonished gasps and cheers. "Did you see that, Mr. Karkaroff?" Igor Karkaroff, however, only curled his lips in displeasure. The Durmstrang students bowed their heads in silence, a stark contrast to the thunderous applause and cheering all around them. Hagrid came charging back onto the field. "All right, that's enough. The task is over. Earl," he called to the battered Hebridean Black, "has conceded." Dragon handlers rushed forward at once. "My goodness," one of them exclaimed, "how did so many dragons end up injured today?" Earl's head was carefully bandaged, and the dragon was gently led off behind a perimeter of wooden barriers. Harry let out a frustrated sigh beside Ginny. Crumb didn't even stand a chance at a fight. He just flew right past Earl. Why didn't I think of that? I mean, how do you even transfer a summoning charm onto a broomstick? Ginny shrugged. Still, it wasn't instant. He took almost 2 minutes to summon his broom. By then, the dragon was nearly on top of him. High in the judge's box, the scoring began. Madame Maxime raised her placard. 9 points. Dumbledore followed with a perfect 10. Arthur Weasley held up another 10. Madame Vocanish offered a 7. For once, there were no boos from the stands. Everyone was eager to see how Igor Karkaroff, who openly despised Viktor Krum, would mark his own champion. Karkaroff slowly raised his wand and produced a single, gleaming silver 3. Chapter 640, The Cursed Karkaroff. A hero who endures injustice often becomes even more endearing once he prevails, and Viktor Krum fit that mold perfectly. A world-class Quidditch star, friend of Harry's, subject of the recent Ron scandal, he'd already captured the imaginations of students at Hogwarts and the other 2 schools. Even his triumphant shouts in this very arena had almost matched Harry's legendary roar, so when his scorecard flashed an absurdly low mark, the entire stadium erupted in outrage. "Ref Karkaroff, get out! Get out!" 1,000 voices joined in the chant, shaking the stands like a tempest. Arthur Weasley stepped forward, wand raised. With a quick flick and a firm command, sonorous, he amplified his voice above the din. "Quiet, please." But the clamoring crowd only grew louder, their fury drowning out even his enchantment. Under that thunderous assault, the beleaguered referee, Igor Karkaroff, stood at last. He drew a shaky breath, raised his wand to his throat, and uttered a crisp incantation, sonorous vocis, transforming his timid whisper into a resonant boom that reverberated over the pitch. "We have made clear from the start," he thundered, "that a champion may face each task armed only with his wand and his school's protective magic. Yet Viktor Krum, our prized warrior, summoned a broomstick to aid him mid-challenge. How, then, can I refrain from deducting points? It is my prerogative as head judge to enforce the rules." The stadium fell into a stunned silence. Karkaroff's declaration hung in the air, charging every spectator with the weight of his judgment. As Viktor Krum's supporters stared in disbelief, it was clear that the controversy would only deepen and that the cursed Karkaroff would become legend in his own right. He'd shown no wizarding finesse tonight, just the brutish flair of a Quidditch chaser gone mad. Porter, flying ahead of him, was no better. Reckless, headlong, completely out of control. Frankly, scoring them a 3 and a 7 was generous. Without a word, Karkaroff sank back onto his bench, his posture frozen as marble, even as the crowd's jeers rained down. But the uproar died almost instantly. Not because Dumbledore stepped in, but because a crackling sound erupted from Karkaroff the moment he sat. He'd been cursed. Ravenous, octopus-like tendrils sprouted across his face, ripping flesh from bone until his features dissolved into a trembling, pinkish mass. The only proof he was still alive was the steam of his ragged breath in the cold air. From the stands, Ron burst out laughing. "Ha! Old dog finally got his comeuppance." Lavender, pale-faced, whispered, "But who would cast a curse like that?" Draco lifted an eyebrow. "The audience, obviously. This match is being broadcast live to wizards all over the country and abroad. Even if each viewer only hurled one curse, that's still a lot of trouble for poor Karkaroff." On the far side of the pitch, Harry and Ginny stood with Hagrid and Professor McGonagall, watching Victor Krum stride off the field unscathed. Harry flicked a look at the Bulgarian champion. "Karkaroff only gave you 3 points," he said, suppressing a grin, "but I think he's learned his lesson." Krum flashed a quick, grateful nod to McGonagall and Hagrid. Leaning close so only Harry could hear, he murmured, "I expected nothing less. Thank you, all of you." Hagrid winked at Harry, giving him a secret thumbs up. "Harry, where's that slimy old headmaster?" he grumbled. 7 points? 10 points would be more like it." Before Harry could answer, a bright green flare erupted behind them, and there stood Molly Weasley, her hair a little frazzled from the fireplace spark, wand already in hand. "What on earth?" she began, eyes sweeping the field. "Mrs. Weasley, please," McGonagall interceded firmly, stepping forward. "Lower your wand. The students are here." Ginny's cheeks turned pink. "Mum," she protested, but Mrs. Weasley's gaze was fixed on the referee's chair, now surrounded by disheveled scorecards fluttering on the wind. Harry pointed. "That's Karkaroff, F over there. He's the one who kept cutting Victor's score without reason." Mrs. Weasley huffed, her wand hand drooping. Ginny hurried to her side, filling in the details. How Krum had performed flawlessly, how the headmaster had arbitrarily docked points, and how poor Victor had suffered under that unfair grading. Professor McGonagall placed a steadying hand on Mrs. Weasley's arm. "Rest assured, we will review every score," she promised. "The final standings will reflect Victor's true performance." Molly exhaled sharply, tucking her wand behind her back. "Good," she said, her tone still edged with motherly fierceness. "I'll be staying to ensure there's no more misconduct." Hagrid chuckled, clapping his hands. "Now that's the spirit. Let's get back to celebrating a proper match, shall we?" With that, the group fell into easy conversation, the tension easing as they headed off the pitch. Harry relieved that justice, and a bit of motherly wrath would see Karkaroff's numbers set right. Mrs. Weasley caught sight of the commotion and tucked her wand safely into her apron. From his seat on the referee's dais, Professor Dumbledore drew his wand and made a few precise gestures toward the mud-encrusted figure that had been Igor Karkaroff. In moments, the muck slipped away and Karkaroff stood before them once more, albeit with thick, fleshy tentacles still ringed across his forehead. Dumbledore explained that the curse had been far too severe to remove entirely, though Harry suspected the headmaster had deliberately left those marks. He even noticed the faintest smile tug at Mrs. Weasley's lips. Nearby, Ching Sheng bent close to Professor McGonagall, exchanging a few urgent whispers. At McGonagall's command, the gouges and divots left by the earlier chaos vanished as if erased by magic. Simultaneously, the Beauxbaton students around the arena began a low, rhythmic chant. Through a gap in the fence behind them, a fire dragon slithered into view, its scales gleaming like mother of pearl in the sunlight. The young women on the Beauxbaton's platform, their memory charms now lifted, gasped at the creature's beauty. They called her Australian Opaleye, the most breathtaking fire dragon in existence, though Harry knew her splendor would soon be overshadowed. When everything was in place, Mr. Weasley raised his whistle and blew 3 sharp notes. From the darkened tent at the far end of the arena, Fleur Delacour emerged, stepping forward with measured grace. As she reached the center of the field, 3 brilliant beams of light stretched down from the sky, enveloping her in a radiant glow. Despite the astonishing scene unfolding, there were no visible warding charms on Fleur's body, no spark in her eyes, no sigils at the crown of her head, no runes along her ribs. Yet no one seemed to notice. All attention was fixed on her statuesque figure, on the effortless grace of her smile, on the perfection of her carriage. It was as if every aspect of her being had been magnified, her every step a study in otherworldly beauty. But this was more than just the natural magnetism of a villa. Harry found himself rooted to the spot, unable to tear his eyes away. He felt as though he'd been turned to stone. Only when his mind cleared did he realize that Fleur, still radiating that near-magical allure, had deftly positioned herself beside the Australian white eye. Its pearly scales gleamed in the afternoon sun, and the light wrapped around her in such a way that it highlighted every curve and contour of her form, as though a living filter had been applied. Then he noticed the creature's transformation. The once proud white eye had lowered its head in complete submission, gently nuzzling Fleur's hand like a contented kitten. From the referee's platform, Mr. Weasley leapt to his feet. After a brief exchange with the golden snitch hovering nearby, he surveyed the stunned crowd and exclaimed, "Unbelievable." It took Fleur Delacour less than a minute to bring the dragon to heel. According to the off-site monitors, had she not deliberately strolled toward the beast, she'd have finished the task even more swiftly. Beauxbaton students erupted into excited chatter, while a small group of lecherous onlookers, who'd been hoping for a more sensational outcome, exhaled in disappointed sighs once they realized the challenge was already over. In the stands, Fleur simply turned and walked straight back to the entrance. The Australian white-eyed dragon snorted its displeasure, sending a few red sparks curling from its nostrils. Hagrid had been ready to step in this time, but the dragon trainers, relieved that their charge was uninjured, hauled the creature away before he could move. They paused briefly at the edge of the field, casting reluctant glances over their shoulders at Fleur's retreating figure. Harry was still trying to wrap his head around what he just witnessed when Ginny tapped him on the arm, a playful smile lighting her face. "You were watching awfully closely just now," she teased. Beside him, Mrs. Weasley returned that same fond smile and exchanged a knowing look with Mr. Weasley up in the stands. Chapter 198, The Last Warrior. On the other side of the arena, Fleur Delacour had just arrived, or rather, Ryan had materialized beside her out of thin air. With a single knock on a nearby beech tree, its trunk swelled and stretched skyward. The ground trembled as tangled branches wove themselves into an elegant platform. From this living scaffold sprouted a spacious deck chair, and overhead, a 10-foot-wide sunshade fashioned from a single massive leaf. Gently sliding an arm around Fleur's waist, Ryan guided her into the recliner. The next instant, they were seated atop the leafy throne, and soft runes, symbols of magical connection, glowed on Fleur's forehead. At that precise moment, the judges raised their scorecards. Madame Maxime, 10 points. Professor Dumbledore, 10 points. Arthur Weasley, 10 points. Mrs. Volkanova, 7 points. Igor Karkaroff, 10 points. A thunderous cheer erupted from the stands. The Last Warrior had truly begun. Chapter 8. Whispers and Wagers. The great hall buzzed with excited chatter. Cups clinked and murmurs swirled as students and spectators dissected the morning's events. "Not bad at all," drawled one Ravenclaw, raising an eyebrow approvingly. "Karkaroff finally came to his senses after that lesson." A third-year Hufflepuff leaned forward, voice low and conspiratorial. "And what about that Volkanova woman? We ought to give her a piece of our minds." "She's a witch, you know," scoffed a Gryffindor girl. "Bet she's just jealous." A Slytherin boy rolled his eyes. Compared to Harry, the Beauxbaton's champion was practically standing still. She was only faster than Crumb, barely. "I'm not convinced she even realized what happened," another student chimed in. "We were all so distracted that I wouldn't be surprised if she missed half the race herself." "Hey, did anyone else notice that Mrs. Volkanova only awarded 7 points to each champion? Every single one, that is, except Harry. He got the full 10. "Classic Volkanova," a sophomore muttered with a grin, "always generous to her favorites, and notoriously stingy with everyone else." From the judges' table, satisfied nods confirmed the outcome. On the opposite side of the hall, Harry Potter sat slumped in his seat, cheeks still flushed from the morning's excitement. Beside him, Ginny Weasley gave his hand a gentle squeeze, her smile warm but tinged with concern. Harry sighed, gaze drifting to the enchanted ceiling. A curious idea took hold, one he'd never shared before. To Ginny's surprise, he began to hum a strange melody, a stream of consciousness litany that tumbled out in half-formed phrases. Brave Volkanova. She studied in Gryffindor House, Durmstrang founded in Germany, where witches rank below wizards, and proud Monty, born in Slytherin, returned home to inherit Durmstrang's dueling and war magic traditions. Ginny blinked at him, utterly bewildered. She reached out, gently plucking at his sleeve. "Harry," she prompted softly, "what on earth are you doing?" He glanced at her, cheeks reddening anew. I don't know. It just popped into my head." Ginny laughed, shaking her head in amusement. "Well, keep it to yourself, okay? Otherwise people will think you've gone off your rocker." He offered a sheepish grin. "Deal." All around them, the hall's conversations resumed. Gossip, speculations, and friendly bets about what the next challenge would bring. But for Harry and Ginny, in that moment, the world outside their little corner of the table faded away, leaving only the promise of new adventures and the comfort of each other's company. "Why didn't we notice it before?" Harry muttered, exasperated. Ginny looked at him, still puzzled. "That surname," he went on. "It belongs to the real founder of Durmstrang, an infamous witch who died under mysterious circumstances. Rumor says she was murdered by, of all people, Monte. And now our new headmistress, Nevinci Volkanova, shares that exact name. How did we miss such an obvious connection?" Ginny frowned, trying to recall their earlier conversations. "We were talking about her back then. How could we not see it?" She trailed off, forgetting her earlier annoyance with Harry's tone. Professor McGonagall, who had been listening from the sidelines, stepped forward. "It's possible a powerful wizard placed a protective enchantment on the Volkanova name," she suggested. "That kind of spell could easily obscure the link between the current headmistress and the original founder of Durmstrang." Hagrid thumped a fist into his open palm. "So she really is a descendant," he said, eyes wide. "Otherwise, why shield that family name so thoroughly?" Everyone turned to Victor Krum for confirmation. Even Mrs. Weasley glanced anxiously at her husband. Krum shook his head, looking genuinely baffled. "Impossible," he said. "Monte left no heirs, at least that's what I've always heard. And I've never come across a single German wizard who holds the Volkanovas in contempt. She had really gone against the tide in her day. She'd founded her own school of magic and paid the price with the Monte family's honor killing. Yet, intriguingly, there's no record of her descendants ever being persecuted." "If only I could ask Mrs. Volkanova herself," Harry sighed, leaning back in his chair. Across the hall, Fleur was deep in conversation with Ryan. "What's the matter? He actually gave me 10 points?" she asked, lifting her chin in surprise. "What do you mean he, meaning?" Huanli frowned. Fleur tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her expression twisting into one of mild disgust. "He's apparently smitten with me." Ryan chuckled softly, inhaling the scent of Fleur's perfume as he rested his arm on the back of her chair and patted her shoulder. "Not because he likes you. Well, not in the sense you're thinking. Let's face it, you're beautiful. Of course people are drawn to you. It's just, he has no quarrel with you." He settled back and began to explain. "You know about the old grudge between Dumbledore and Grindelwald, right? And Grindelwald's current post at Durmstrang? There was also that whole fallout involving Harry, Krum, and Grindelwald after the Triwizard Tournament." Fleur steepled her fingers, considering. "So then, Irvas will score high too?" Ryan shook his head. "I don't think so. You have to factor in his own standing and achievements. Reputation matters almost as much as personal history." Ryan's tactics had proven devastatingly effective against ordinary fire dragons, but today he was facing the fastest, most venomous of them all, the Peruvian viper-toothed dragon. A faint smile tugged at his lips as he turned to the robed spectators. "Don't take my word for it," he called out. "Just watch." With a crackle of energy, a flicker of brass-colored light and shadow darted onto the arena floor. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The dragon was astonishingly small, barely 12 feet from snout to tail, less than half the length of a Hebridean black dragon. Yet its speed was almost supernatural. To the naked eye, it was little more than a blurred streak of molten metal. Unlike the lumbering beasts that had gone before, so swiftly dispatched they never even unfurled their wings, this little wonder took full advantage of its gift for flight. As it hovered, green flame curled around its mouth and nostrils, dancing in eerie spirals before vanishing into the air. The glow didn't come from the fire itself, but from the pronounced venom glands tucked beneath its snow-white fangs. A collective murmur rippled through the arena as the more knowledgeable wizards exchanged uneasy glances. They recognized the species instantly and remembered the warnings. Even long-term exposure to a viper-tooth's toxins could prove deadly. Eyes fixed on his opponent, Ryan readied himself. The Peruvian viper tooth darted forward again, its blazing eyes trained on him. No other fire dragon had ever tested his skills like this, nor posed a threat quite so insidious. The true battle was about to begin. Dragonpox is terrifyingly contagious. Infected wizards break out in oozing, green-blistered sores, and if you're struck by its poisonous flame or bitten by its venomous fangs, the consequences are almost unfathomable. Add to that the dragon's astonishing speed. While it may not rival its fellow fire dragons in raw strength, its ability to incapacitate a wizard is second to none. Oddly enough, this particular fire dragon seems almost tame. As soon as it appeared in the arena, its thick iron chains were shown to be mere decoration. It strode forward calmly, its gaze never straying far from the challenger's tent. It was as if the beast instinctively knew where its opponent would emerge. In hindsight, the previous fire dragon behaved in much the same way. We simply didn't have enough time to notice. Meanwhile, the students from Castrobsha, draped in robes the exact shade of that poisonous green, completed their third incantation in perfect unison, their voices echoing through the stands. Then, high above the arena, Arthur Weasley, seated in the referee's box, raised his whistle to his lips and let out a sharp final blast. Alvus, the last Hufflepuff duelist, stepped into the arena looking deathly pale. He gripped his wand so tightly his knuckles went white. Across the sandy floor, the Peruvian viper-tooth dragon shimmered, splitting into multiple after-images as it lunged. At the same instant, 3 streaks of enchanted energy hurtled toward him, each one crackling with fierce intent. Special thanks to my classmates for their monthly support, and to everyone else for your recommendations and subscriptions. Chapter 199. A Stunning Duel. No one could say why the Peruvian venom-toothed dragon had suddenly turned on Ervus, the competition's youngest contestant at just 17 years old. To onlookers, its attack seemed unprovoked, but Ryan understood all too well. It was driven by fear. After all, Hagrid himself had recruited Ryan and 3 other monster captains into this ruthless contest, where the losers would serve as mounts to their conquerors. 3 brutal rounds later, 2 of the strongest participants lay grievously wounded. The woman who'd narrowly outmatched Ryan had collapsed into incoherent babble, insisting she was destined to become Fu Rong's dog. That left only Ryan and Ervus to face the final trial. In this arena, the powerful sharpened their claws and the desperate devised cunning tricks. The Venom Tooth, the weakest of the bunch, had no intention of honoring any unwritten rules. It would rely on blinding speed and stealth to catch its opponent off guard. Spectators braced for Ervus to forfeit under such a sudden onslaught. Instead, the young mage remained eerily calm. Moments before the dragon lunged, he murmured a silent incantation and wove a protective ward around his upper left side. The only sign of the spell was a barely perceptible ripple in the air. Then the duel began in earnest. Dragon's Claw against Arcane Shield. It was a breathtaking clash of raw power and deft sorcery, and neither combatant showed any sign of yielding. The clash of gold and iron rang out across the field. Then the brass-clad warrior sprang upward, hovering in midair as he peered down at Ervus with cautious curiosity. Beside the tent, Professor McGonagall's voice carried over the din. Remarkable protective enchantment. He's focused all of his defensive magic into a pinpoint area to blunt that sudden fire breath attack. But how did he know the dragon would strike from this direction? Ah, he's metabolizing the war blessing it granted him and converting it into raw spell power. It costs him dearly, but it's a shrewd tactic. Harry and Ginny exchanged puzzled looks. Shrewd? Harry whispered. Isn't this supposed to be a straight-up melee challenge? Why resort to arcane incantations in front of Ervus if not to fight hand-to-hand? As the warrior's glowing aura began to fade, they turned to Hagrid for an explanation. Ginny didn't wait for Harry. Hagrid, I'm confused. I thought our team event was all about direct combat. What's the real point of these magic conversions? Hagrid rubbed his hands together with a grin. Direct combat? Not quite, love. The tournament's real test is mastering the magic granted to you, learning to distill a blessing into concentrated power, much like an alchemist draws strength from a dragon's fire, then channel it through your spells. That, more than raw brawn, is the true secret of the game. Professor McGonagall spread a set of scrolls across her desk. The incantations for all 3 collective spells have now been published, she said, her finger tracing the ancient runes. Our alchemy curriculum even includes a module on translating mantras and deconstructing them into magical scripts, skills you can apply in the field or use purely for research. Tell me, Harry, have you noticed anything curious about the other combatants? Harry leaned forward. Aside from me, none of the other warriors display any obvious blessing, he replied. That's why I thought, since I already used Poppy's transfiguration ritual to boost my strength, it made sense to combine it with a group magic blessing and the draconic combat technique. McGonagall allowed herself a wry smile. Clever, yes, but according to my calculations, even a wizard who layers Poppy's transformation, a collective blessing, and dragon-fighting methods still falls far short of a dragon's natural power. It's all down to physiology, bone density, muscle structure, lung capacity. Dragons simply outperform us in every category. She paused, her gaze sharpening. You, however, are a singular case. Your physiology differs markedly from that of an ordinary wizard. If I hadn't been ducting my recent study into Fanir's incarnation, I might have concluded you were a werewolf mage. Harry frowned, unconvinced. All right, he said, but if a dragon's inherent strength makes them virtually unbeatable, why on earth would a fire dragon agree to become a player's mount? McGonagall's lips curved into a knowing smile, as though she'd been waiting for that very question. Ah, she replied, that, my dear boy, is the question worth answering. I thought wizards only surrendered when you beat them in hand-to-hand? Harry protested. Hagrid scratched the back of his head, looking sheepish. No, it's me. I'm the one who's been talking to those children. At that, Harry winced. He remembered all too well the promise he'd made to Ginny before the match. Now, with her sitting just a few rows away in the stands, he wished the ground would open up and swallow him whole. Meanwhile, the arena was alive with excitement. Bang! 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 The sharp ring of enchanted metal striking dragon scales echoed all around. In the center of the field stood Irvus, radiant in armor, woven with the magic of digestive war, parrying every strike delivered by the famed Peruvian viper-toothed dragon. Each time the dragon lunged, Irvus met its jaws with a sturdy shield. Each poisonous fire blast was deflected by flashes of magic. High atop the control tower, Ryan couldn't help but grin. The rating metrics on the Skywalker Alchemy Workshop's analysis computer were climbing faster than he'd ever seen, rivaling even that infamous day when Harry had somehow ended up in the arena sans robes and Fleur Delacour had rushed to cover him. Back on the field, speed was the dragon's greatest asset, and sometimes its downfall. Its lightning-quick swipes and venomous breath sprays were nearly impossible to follow with the naked eye, but Irvus danced through them all with an almost balletic grace. A claw rasped past Irvus's helm, a dribble of green flame licked the edges of his shield, yet each attack was met with a flawless dodge or a perfectly timed counterstrike. The crowd was on its feet, breathless. Every roar of approval, every gasp of astonishment filled the air. It was more than a contest of strength or skill. It was a display of courage, wit, and the unpredictable wonder of magic, clashing with brute force. And as Irvus squared off once more against the legendary dragon, every spectator, Harry and Ginny included, felt the electric thrill of a battle that would be talked about for years to come. From the vantage point of the wizarding crowd, Vals's performance against the fire dragon was nothing short of legendary. Every bit as riveting as Harry's hand-to-hand duels, as composed as Fleur's leisurely grace, and as breathtaking as Crumb's supersonic broom stunts. It surpassed anything they'd ever imagined. Standing in the center of the arena, Vals took a steadying breath and let the blessing's power flood through him. In one fluid motion, he whipped his wand to the upper right and shouted, "Lock the tongue! Seal the throat!" A brass-tinted afterimage streaked outward and struck the dragon squarely on its snout. The beast froze in midair, jaws snapping shut as if glued, only a few sputtering green embers spilling from its nostrils. Vals wasted no time. He spun on his heel and commanded, "Bind it now!" With that, he swept his wand behind him. Boom! Ethereal chains shot forth, wrapping around the venom-toothed dragon's legs and dragging it down with a thunderous crash. "Every ounce of strength, release it!" Vals roared. A final beam of cerulean light exploded from his hazel wand. The dragon's taut muscles convulsed, then gave way. Its great head dropped limply to the sand. For a heartbeat, the arena was silent, then it erupted into thunderous cheers. Hagrid marched forward, beaming, and proclaimed, "Irvus is the victor." A roar rose from the stands. "How outrageous! Why am I even applauding? He's obviously a pupil of that insufferable Vulcanova." Harry's match was exciting too, just far too brief. Incredible. That airing oaf rolls so smoothly it makes you sick. Then Arthur Weasley's amplified voice cut through the clamor. "Excellent. Our Castrubshi champions displayed superb dueling prowess tonight. Every spell was cast with precision, and he answered that surprise attack without missing a beat. 10 minutes on the clock, yes, but undoubtedly the most thrilling match we've witnessed here." High above the field, Ryan sat perched in a tree, though his attention lay elsewhere. He allowed himself a small, amused smile at Madame Pomfrey's restless pacing. She looked convinced she was useless until an injury demanded her skills. Then his gaze settled on Professor Snape, who stood rigid and silent. The locked tongue and throat jinx, Snape's own creation from his student days, had been turned against him. He could never have imagined that a curse born in his own mind would cross oceans, travel to the heart of the Brazilian rainforest, and come into the hands of a Castrubsha student. And as the stunned potions master tried to swallow past the spell's grip, old, painful memories stirred in him once more. Bind the tongue, seal the throat. The curse fused his tongue to the roof of his mouth, granting him only a momentary advantage. More importantly, it let the 4 would-be thieves get a head start on the silencing charm. Unsurprisingly, they walked away with extra credit and the professor's glowing praise. Then came the upside-down golden bell spell, and everything fell apart. He ended up dangling from the ceiling by his ankles, his once clean underwear now disgracefully stained. Lily's horrified gasp echoed through the hall, and in a panic, he spat out the word mudblood. That single insult shattered any friendship they'd shared. "Ryan, why are you laughing?" Fleur demanded, tossing her silver-streaked golden hair over her shoulder. Ryan just shrugged, a crooked grin lighting up his face. "Honestly, a well-placed prank spell is still the quickest way to grab someone's attention." Chapter 643, A Tense Farewell. Harry's cheeks burned. He'd just discovered the most mortifying truth. There's nothing more embarrassing than chatting behind someone's back, then having that very person catch you in the act. And the unlucky eavesdroppee was none other than Irvus. Moments ago, Harry and his friends had been animatedly debating how the judges would score the latest duels. They all agreed that Irvus's match had been the least spectacular, slow to build, with none of the flash that drew oohs and ahs. Yet in every other respect, Irvus had delivered a masterclass. Precise footwork, razor-sharp defenses, and patient tactical strikes that left his opponent reeling. It was the kind of performance any ambitious wizard would kill to study. Around the circle, each fighter's unique gift had been praised in turn. Harry's prowess in unarmed defense, his ability to fend off curses without so much as a flick of a wand, came first. Then there was Crumb, whose broom seemed fused to his very being, every twist, every turn perfectly synchronized. Fleur's Vila heritage followed, an elegant grace and magnetic pull no spell could mimic. And Poppy, whose celebrated transformation technique remained an unrepeatable marvel of magical anatomy. But Irvus, he needed no fancy lineage, no signature spell. His true weapon was instinct, the uncanny knack for striking first, controlling the pace, and then finishing the fight before his adversary even knew what hit him. Now Irvus stood before them, arms folded, eyes narrowed. Harry groped for an excuse, but the room was thick with awkward silence. He realized, with a sinking heart, that this farewell would be anything but friendly. Ginny bit her lip. Of course she couldn't stand by and let Professor McGonagall and Mrs. Weasley look down on Irvus like that. She sprang to her feet. "That's not fair," she snapped. "He's a tree shepherd." Irvus's girlfriend hurried forward to back her up, but Harry wasn't about to be outdone. "Actually," he interjected, "his real talent is seeing what's about to happen." Irvus gave a modest nod. "Harry's right," he admitted, "but I can only predict 7 seconds into the future." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Harry's cheeks burned. He wished the floor would open up and swallow him whole. High above them, the judges prepared their verdicts. Madame Maxime raised her wand, and a glowing 5 floated into view. A buzz of commentary swept through the spectators. I'd deduct a point for the time lag, but even so, 6 seems fair. Ha! Revenge points from Madame Volcanova, 7 for my dear Miss Delacour. Next came a calm voice from the headmaster's seat. 8 points, announced Dumbledore. Merlin's beard. Why can't our own professors be as generous as Beauxbatons? Someone laughed. He may be old and grumpy, another chimed in, but he does know a spectacular display when he sees one. Finally, Arthur Weasley waved his wand. A bright 7 glittered in the air, and the hall erupted in applause. Harry, meanwhile, simply slumped in his seat, certain he would never live down this moment. All the scores thus far had fallen exactly where everyone expected, but now all eyes turned to Igor Karkaroff, the notoriously strict headmaster of Durmstrang. How would he reward his own champion? Then, in full view of the packed arena, the headmistress of Beauxbatons, Madame Volcanova, rose to her feet. With a graceful flick of her wand, she summoned a brilliant golden 10 that hovered in the air above Harry. A roar of protest erupted from the stands. But you only gave him 8. That isn't fair. Potter even tore off his shirt, showed off every muscle. 7 points is a joke. Come on, brothers, hex her. Madame Volcanova met their shouts with serene composure. She tapped her wand against her forearm, magnifying her voice with a simple charm. I awarded this score on the advice of Headmaster Karkaroff. He said that only champions who truly display mastery of wizardry deserve top marks. I took that to heart. If you doubt my judgment, feel free to ask the headmaster of Durmstrang himself. Then she sat down. An abrupt hush fell over the reviewing stand. Even the other headmasters, momentarily beside themselves, were calmed only when Dumbledore shot them a reassuring nod. Only one remained poised to deliver his verdict. Igor Karkaroff, his once human face now overgrown with writhing, inky tendrils, lifted his wand to cast the final score. A low murmur of disappointment rippled through the crowd in the stands. No one could read Karkaroff's expression from this distance. Not everyone, however, had been drawn away by the spectacle. Under the tent, the 7 observers exchanged knowing looks. Before Karkaroff himself could speak, Professor Irva stepped forward. He turned to Harry and Victor Krum, inclining his head in apology. "I'm sorry for my earlier failings as headmaster," he said quietly. "But understand this. She singled out Karkaroff purely because of her hatred for Durmstrang, and she showed her favor only to me." Krum shrugged. "Frankly, I don't mind," he replied. "You know as well as I do that Karkaroff and I have never gotten along. He had his reasons for trying to push me aside." Harry's mind was already racing. Vals and the headmaster had always been unusually close. Vals was practically her right hand. Harry wondered whether Vals knew why Madame Volcanova had placed that unusual protective charm on her family name. Before the question even formed on his lips, Vals spoke up. "That charm," he said, looking down thoughtfully, "was woven by Madame Volcanova's own ancestors. It was meant to guard their descendants against Monty's followers." Harry frowned as Lady Volcanova's final words echoed in the clearing. "Let them bear the Volcanova name," she had declared, "but they'll never live up to our founder." For some reason, the remark brought Ryan Smith to Harry's mind, and with it a flicker of unease. Were the Smiths hiding something of their own? Before he could dwell on it, the conversation shifted. From her lofty perch on a chaise nestled in the beech tree's highest branches, Fleur Delacour let out an exasperated huff. "That old bat," she muttered under her breath. "Why hasn't anyone turned a curse on her yet?" Ryan's pale eyes glazed over as he summoned his private scrying vision. In an instant, his awareness leapt northward over the Scottish Highlands, swept across the Atlantic, and settled on a flat-topped pyramid lying sunken beneath the turquoise waters of the Bermuda Triangle. According to arcane whispers, this drowned temple was the lair of the wizard truly behind the recent hexes. Fleur rolled her eyes. "And they actually praised Castruptia's warriors for their performance," she scoffed. "Completely unfair, but at least they have Karkaroff from Durmstrang to play foil." A soft chuckle drifted from beside her. Forong leaned forward, her expression amused. "They, you say? You mean Penelope and Kate, don't you? What, afraid I'll see shades of them in you? Or is it jealousy?" Fleur shot her friend a sideways grin. "Maybe a little of both." She sank back into the cushions, folding her arms contentedly. Above them, the beech leaves whispered in the wind as if already plotting the next move in an unfolding game of secrets and rivalries, one that stretched from the dark heart of Atlantis' ruins all the way to the hidden legacies of the Smith family. Fleur pressed her lips into a thin line, still smarting from Ryan's earlier jibe. "Don't forget, I can get jealous too. I'm a warrior." Ryan merely shrugged, steering the conversation away from the real issue. "You care about bows batons more than anyone's ever cared about Hogwarts. So tell me, where's the jealousy coming from?" Fleur lifted an eyebrow. He was dodging her question, of course, buying time, skirting the thing she truly wanted answered. Hermione, who'd been watching them from the sidelines, rolled her eyes and muttered, "Seriously, are you mocking us?" Fleur's frustration flickered in her eyes, but before she could reply, the action on the field grabbed everyone's attention back. On the DJ's bench, Igor Karkaroff finally raised his wand. A hush fell across the stands. Many wondered whether he'd succumb to the pressure from Mrs. Volkanova and hand out inflated marks. His performance had been precisely what it was, steady, if unremarkable. Then a ribbon of silvery magic spiraled from Karkaroff's wand, twisting into the shape of a perfect 5 in midair. He rose to his feet and cast a quiet amplification charm over his voice. "If you'll lend me your ears." He cleared his throat theatrically and announced, "I find myself in full agreement with Madame Maxime's appraisal. 5 points." With that, he and the rest of the judges stood and hurried from the arena, no doubt eager to avoid any disgruntled curses from disappointed competitors. The crowd buzzed with murmured excitement, and Fleur, Hermione, and Ryan exchanged glances, each lost in their own private thoughts about what had just unfolded. Accompanying Karkaroff as he strode from the hall were his Durmstrang students, each of them silent and eyes cast to the floor. Mrs. Volkanova's cheeks flamed with outrage at the 5-point penalty he'd just incurred. With a curt nod, Karkaroff rose and swept out, his cloak trailing behind him. Author's note: many thanks to Duanmu Anran for your monthly support, and to all readers for your recommendations and subscriptions. Chapter 644. The game officially ends. Phew! For a moment there, I thought they were going to start fighting. Arthur Weasley blurted, just as he was rising to announce the result. He'd accidentally amplified his own voice with an enlarging charm. His words rang out through the entire arena. "Honestly, Arthur," Mrs. Weasley muttered beside him, rolling her eyes. "Dad!" Ginny buried her face in her hands, cheeks burning. In the stands, Fred and George roared with laughter and applause. "Way to go, Dad! That's our father for you!" Ron and Draco, however, barely glanced Arthur's way. In their eyes, Mr. Weasley was nothing less than a pioneer of the magical world. Despite the Ministry's ban on modifying Muggle technology, he'd quietly discovered loopholes and invented such clever contraptions that fellow wizards whispered about him as if he'd brought fire to humanity. To Ron and Draco, he was simply brilliant. On the field, the two finalists had stiffened at Arthur's outburst and come to an abrupt halt. Realizing his mistake, Arthur waved to reassure them. "Don't worry, I was talking about the fire dragon. From here, I can still see the Australian opali and the Peruvian viper tooth." With that clarification, both competitors relaxed, picked up their wands, and the final phase of the contest resumed. They were only a breath away from throwing blows when Mr. Weasley stepped between them, hands raised for silence. "All right, that's enough," he said, voice firm but calm. "Before anyone else gets hurt, let's hear the results of this first challenge." He reached into his robes, producing a quill and a long strip of parchment. Each competitor was scored out of 50 by our panel of judges, myself included. The points you've earned here will carry over into the second task, and they'll be crucial in determining your standing before the final challenge. He cleared his throat and began to read. Harry Potter, 44 points. Victor Crumb, 39 points. Fleur Delacour, 47 points. Albus of Hufflepuff, 35 points. A ripple of applause broke out, though a few faces still wore the tension of the near brawl. Mr. Weasley waited until the last echo died away before continuing. The second task will be a team competition, scheduled for the afternoon of January 24th. The postponed individual competition, the third task, will take place exactly 1 month later, on the afternoon of February 24th. He paused, then invoked some silent charm. A golden snitch, drawn by enchantment, swooped down from above. It landed in Weasley's outstretched palm and coughed up a second parchment before whisking back into the sky. "Very well," Mr. Weasley said, waving the parchment for emphasis. "That concludes today's proceedings. You may all return to the grounds. I'll be calling each of you to my tent presently for a brief word, so don't wander off too far." As the students dispersed, Ryan Kerrigan lingered in the branches of the massive beech that overlooked the pitch. He sat on a deck chair lashed to a sturdy limb, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on Fleur Delacour. She stood below, trembling slightly, her silver and blue robes still damp with exertion. "I'm afraid you'll have to go in next," Ryan said quietly, almost gently. "He called your name, so you'd best not keep him waiting." Fleur's breath caught. For a moment, her usual poise deserted her. Then she squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, and slipped out of her flying robes. She drew on a fresh set of clothes, each movement precise and deliberate, though her heart still pounded. Ryan watched her in silence until she was ready. Then he reached out, brushing a stray lock of silvery hair from her face. "Good luck," he murmured. Fleur managed a small, resolute nod, her lips curved in the faintest of smiles. And with that, she strode toward the judge's tent, ready to face whatever came. Ryan waved his hand, and in an instant, Fleur vanished. He settled back into a sage-like calm, still reclining in his chair with his eyes gently closed. A moment later, Harry and the others returned to the tent, after saying their goodbyes to Mrs. Weasley, Professor McGonagall, and Hagrid. Inside, they found Fleur wearing a decidedly sour expression. "Why didn't you warn me?" Crumb teased, giving Irvis a friendly rap on the shoulder. During their wait outside, Crumb had discovered that Irvis wasn't nearly as aloof as he'd first seemed, and the two had begun to grow comfortable in each other's company. "My talent is foresight," Irvis replied with a smirk. "But it depends entirely on where I'm looking. Since I'm shorter than you, it took me a full 6 seconds after entering the tent to spot Miss Delacour, only because I heard you mention her. I simply didn't have the chance to warn you." After all, if Crumb hadn't frozen at the doorway in surprise, Irvis wouldn't have been momentarily dazzled. "Wait, perhaps I spoke too soon," Irvis added, raising an eyebrow. At that precise moment, Harry leaned close to Crumb and said decisively, "Fleur already has a boyfriend, and he's incredible, absolutely brilliant at magical duels." He made sure to emphasize the word incredible. Victor Crumb narrowed his eyes as he watched Harry. "Wait, he isn't your boyfriend, is he?" Harry went pale. No, of course not. How could you even think that?" Crumb shrugged, evidently relieved. "All right then, but tell me this. What's the point of being an international star if every beautiful girl you meet is already taken?" Fleur Delacour, fanning herself impatiently with a lace fan, glanced toward the empty pitch. "Why hasn't the referee come out yet?" Harry cleared his throat. "Oh, Mr. Weasley had to sort out some family matters first." He offered Fleur a quick, reassuring smile. Better to leave her and Ryan's elder brother on good terms, especially since she saw Harry simply as a little brother to Ryan. Just then, Mr. Weasley burst into the waiting room, looking slightly disheveled as he extricated himself from Mrs. Weasley's worried clutches. He hurried over to the group, catching his breath. "Sorry I kept you all hanging around." He held up a rolled parchment. "I'll be brief. The match just aired live, and the response has been fantastic. I've got word from Skywalker's Alchemy Workshop. Our viewership numbers have officially hit the threshold for selling individual player merchandise. Expect to receive mock-up designs for your personal gear within the week." With that, he passed the parchment to Harry and stepped back, a triumphant glint in his eye. The tension in the room eased immediately as everyone realized the true reason for their wait. Business was booming. Mr. Weasley reached beneath his robes and drew out 4 thick green earmuffs that looked as though they'd been fashioned from dragon hide. They were padded and plush, sure to keep out any chill. He held them up for everyone to see. "These earmuffs," he explained, "along with the dragon figurine you already have, belong to you. Inside each one is a clue, a puzzle that will help you solve your second task. When you're ready, try them on and make sure you're carrying the dragon doll. Any questions?" There was a brief moment of silence. When no one spoke up, Mr. Weasley smiled and nodded. "All right, then. Good luck." Victor Krum and Elvis ducked out of the tent together and made their way toward the Black Lake. Fleur Delacour slipped out through the opposite flap. A few seconds later, Mrs. Weasley bustled in escorting Percy, Charlie, Fred, George, Ron, Ginny, and the rest of the family. In fact, the only Weasley missing was Bill. Everyone else had gathered here in hopes of seeing Harry off. Mrs. Weasley beamed at Harry. "You were incredible today, Harry. You were the fastest of all the champions, and that dragon, well, it was the worst injured of the lot. I was so relieved when it finally calmed down. Honestly, I still don't know what kind of magic Hagrid used to tame it." Harry grinned, carefully accepting one of the earmuffs from Mr. Weasley's outstretched hand. As he slipped it over his ears, he felt its reassuring warmth, and somehow a faint thrum of promise for the challenge to come. Charlie strode into the room, bright-eyed and unusually chatty for someone whose job was dragon taming. "Ever since they made contact with him," he announced, "the dragons have gotten a lot smarter and a lot naughtier. Lyle's the worst of the bunch. A lot of our old calming methods just don't work on them anymore." He shook his head. "Not useless, mind you, just less reliable. On the bright side, they've grown more measured. We're getting hurt far less often." Ron flinched, his fist curling at his side. "Hold on. Trainer of dragons? Why didn't you come see us when we were at Hagrid's?" Mrs. Weasley shot him a sharp look. "Ronald Weasley, don't wave your fist at your brother." "Sorry, Mum," Ron muttered, slinking back. Mrs. Weasley turned her attention to Harry, stepping forward with obvious concern. She ran an anxious gaze over his robes. "Harry, are you all right? Dumbledore's gone off his rocker, I tell you, sending you to deal with dragons. It's incredibly dangerous." Harry stared at her. Something about her tone was familiar, but he'd never met her before. Why was she fussing over him like this? Chapter 645, The Reason Ron Grew Up Safely. After fussing over Harry's well-being, Mrs. Weasley turned to her husband as if ticking through an official roll call and began to report on each of their children. "Percy," she said, "thank you for all your help with Harry's transfiguration lessons. And Charlie, well done on managing those dragons at the reserve. I know how challenging that can be," she added, unaware that Hagrid had been the real trainer. She paused to glance at Ron and smiled. "And Ron, I must say, your nose is spotless today. No mud or soot at all." Ron beamed, touched by the small praise. Mrs. Weasley saved her final remarks for Ginny. "Ginny, you've been an absolute model as Harry's companion, always at his side." At this, Mr. Weasley and the twins, Fred and George, exchanged nervous looks. They knew exactly why Ginny had been so attentive, but before Fred and George could start crafting excuses, Mrs. Mott Weasley fixed them with a knowing stare. "And you two, you were flying around the garden on that peculiar chair this morning, shouting about your latest inventions. Canary crackers, extend-a-ears, skip-it gum, and whisper-tie bow ties." She turned to Arthur Weasley, her smile warm but expectant. "Arthur, what do you make of that? I remember that you're in charge of both aircraft registrations and joke product patents, aren't you?" Mrs. Weasley's voice was sharp as she folded her arms across her chest. Arthur Weasley mopped at his brow, relief and panic warring on his face. "The Office of Patents for Magical Jokes and Novelties is part of the Department of Magical Games and Sports," he explained hurriedly. "Ludo Bagman was the director, but he resigned, and the position's still vacant. I'm just stepping in as acting director for the contest. Frankly, the patent office has very little to do with me." He let out a shaky breath. That seemed to be the heart of her anger. Harry, standing nearby, pricked up his ears. He'd been half responsible for the oversight, but Ginny's stern glare warned him to keep quiet. Harry merely huffed and fell silent. Tonight, he suspected, Arthur would find himself on the sofa. True to form, over the next 10 minutes, Mrs. Weasley proceeded to catalog every trivial blunder Arthur had ever made. Harry, Ginny, and the others shrank back, feeling as though the minutes stretched into hours. Finally, Mrs. Weasley shot Arthur one last disapproving look, grabbed his hand, and marched him out of the tent. "Good luck with the dragons, Charlie," she called over her shoulder, half apology, half command. Charlie gave a small wave and slipped away into the morning mist, off to tend the beasts that never let him forget his real job. "Call." "I thought Fred and I were going to get eaten." Fred and George both exhaled in relief. They'd been sure Mum was furious with them. Now, though, it looked like Dad was the real target. "Hang on. Don't celebrate just yet," Ron warned, eyeing his brothers. "You two sold wares after the match again?" And you never even asked what I called my fizzing whizbees. Harry watched the familiar scene with some amusement. Ron's indignant stance reminded him of Mrs. Weasley when she was cross. Before Fred or George could reply, Ginny piped up. Ron, did you forget that you skipped over your own brothers to join forces with Dervis Bance? Ron's cheeks colored bright red. But they forgave me ages ago. I even showed them the new DeVos Bance channel. They've played pranks on me a dozen times since, haven't they? Fred and George each slung an arm around Ron's shoulders and grinned. Oh, it's not a question of anger anymore, Fred said. We're wondering if we were a bit too quick to forgive. George nodded. Seriously, should we take it back? Ron wrenched his right arm free from George's grip and called down the corridor. Percy's still out there. Hey, Percy, are you just going to stand by while they badmouth me? Seeing Ron waving him over, Percy, who had been settling in to watch the show, reluctantly stood and made his way across the room. Oi, you two, he began, addressing Fred and George. Why don't you sell Ron's smoke bombs today? They're all the rage, equally popular at Hogwarts and among students in the other houses, and you'd make a tidy profit. Fred released Ron's arm with a grunt. Honestly, Ron only has himself to blame, he said, shaking his head. George chimed in with a grin. All he's done lately is gab about snacks, sprinting, and riding firebolts, while sneaking our best quality mist bombs over to Dervish and Bangas. George has a point, Fred agreed. Their mist bottles are flying off the shelves, especially now that Hogsmeade is open on Sundays this term. Ron rubbed his arm where Fred had been roughly tugging. Well, I'm not seeing many customers here either, he muttered. We haven't even launched our full marketing campaign yet, George pointed out, and Ron still turns up on his own. Fred reached out as if to tussle Ron's hair again. Just look at this. Stop it, Ron yelped, wriggling free. My hair's been falling out lately. I don't want to start balding like Dad. George laughed. Better safe than sorry, mate. Percy sighed and rolled his eyes. See, Ron, you'd have done things more smoothly if you'd planned properly from the start, and maybe watch your words next time. Ron Weasley had a knack for offending people without meaning to. If only Dad were here, but he had no time to dwell on how patient Dad had been lately. This time, Ron had managed to rile up Fred and George, and who knew who he'd upset next. If a stranger had done this, they wouldn't just tousle his hair and call it a day. Tears welled up in Ron's eyes as he turned to Percy. Percy, please, say something. He'd been counting on his older brother for backup, but instead, Percy fixed him with a stern glare and delivered a lecture so long and pungent it put even Mum's infamous foot wraps to shame. Miraculously, it worked. Fred and George immediately let Ron's hair go. That's enough, Ron panted, rubbing his scalp as he stood. We're going, now! He grabbed Harry's and Ginny's arms and practically dragged them out of the tent. On the walk back to the castle, Harry paused every so often to wave at passing students. Ron, still gingerly touching his hair, finally spoke up. Harry, why didn't you help me? You'd have stood up for me, just like Dad. Ginny snorted in exasperation. Why should Harry come to your rescue? You started the whole thing. She rolled her eyes as a cluster of giggling girls drifted by, clearly more interested in Harry than in any family squabble. What was even more discouraging was how they behaved as if Harry didn't exist. They carried on their conversation, casually turning their backs, as though Harry were invisible, and once again, Ron got caught in the middle. Percy's earlier remark finally sank in. Ron, you're too careless with your words. You almost always offend someone without meaning to. Harry, surprised at his own reaction, found himself nodding in agreement. Ron's shoulders slumped. Ginny's tone had reminded him far too much of their mother's lectures. He forced a guilty smile, dropped his gaze, and muttered, You're right, Percy. I'll watch my tongue. Then, shifting gears almost instantly, he looked back up at Harry with concern. So, what did Dad say about the second match? I heard the format's changed. Isn't it supposed to be more dangerous now? And what exactly did he tell you? Ginny chimed in, leaning forward, her brows drawn together. Harry fought the urge to smile. Of course, that was Ron's secret to survival. The moment he sensed real danger, like Ginny's disappointed stare, he'd immediately run through the same three-step routine. Admit fault, apologize, change the topic. It was remarkably effective, irritating, but effective all the same. To be continued. P.S. Many thanks to Lang Wang for the monthly ticket and to all my classmates for your recommendations and subscriptions. Chapter 203. Albus, Kate Lewinster Dumbledore. Kate Lewinster Dumbledore paced back and forth in the mirrored chamber, her robes whispering against the marble floor. Across from her, Ryan leaned against the stone wall, looking more amused than concerned. "What do you mean by PUA?" Kate demanded, folding her arms. Ryan shrugged and offered a sly grin. "Let me illustrate." Kate waited, eyebrows raised. He cleared his throat. "First, you make a cold, objective statement. You're too short. Technically, it's just a fact, but you can spin it as an insult." Kate gave him a skeptical look. "Is that really an insult?" "Second," Ryan went on, "you tack on a recommendation. You're too short. You ought to drink a height-increasing potion." Kate laughed. "Tell me there's actually a potion for that." "Not yet," Ryan admitted, "but imagine there is." "Finally, the PUA move. Everyone else hates your height, but I like you just the way you are." You plant the criticism, then rescue them, and make yourself the hero. Kate's lip curled into a half-smile. "That actually sounds familiar." Ryan grinned. "It should. I just told you I like you short." All around them, the marble walls and arched windows reflected the exact layout of the Ravenclaw girls' dormitory at Hogwarts, right down to the pale blue curtains and four-poster beds. Yet Kate and Ryan were most definitely not in the castle. The sign on the door read "Third Year," even though Kate and her friend Penello were seventh years. And the bed where Ryan lounged, its nameplate read Hermione Granger. Before Kate could demand an explanation, another voice cut in, her own voice, but unmistakably coming from Padma Patil's mouth. Padma's face stared at her from the mirrored reflection. "Why?" the Padma-voiced Kate asked. "Are we lying in Hermione Granger's bed, me wearing Padma Patil's face, while you lecture me on PUA tactics?" "Silence," answered them. The enchanted chamber's mirrored walls rippled, swallowing their echo, and the uncanny Hogwarts dorm shrank back into shadow. Questions hovered in the dim light, unanswered, as the two friends faced a mystery that neither charm nor potion could solve. Kate traced lazy circles across Ryan's chest with her fingertip. He flushed, trying to steady his breathing. "I thought you were going to use Hermione's shadow," he admitted, voice low. "Who knew you'd pick Padma's?" Kate paused, tilting her head in mock surprise. "Isn't she lovely?" "She is," Ryan murmured, still pink-cheeked. "Not to your taste," Kate teased. "Like Ginny?" Ryan shook his head. "No." "Then." Before she could finish, Kate grinned and whispered in Japanese, "Itadakimasu, I'm going to begin." 10,000 words later, time had blurred in the most satisfying way. Ryan found himself straightening his robes beside the four-poster bed. He smoothed the fabric, heart still pounding. "Thank you for your hospitality," he said, voice unsteady but grateful. Kate was already returning to her usual form, her casual attire slipping back into place. She raised an eyebrow. "You do know I understand Japanese? Why the surprise phrase?" Ryan tugged at the wide sleeves of his robe, feigning nonchalance. It just made things feel more immersive. He gave a crooked smile. "Besides, as a gentleman, I hardly, well, you know, but in the virtual Japanese lane, it's all taught properly by Teacher Kang. It's different." Kate chuckled and shook her head, gathering her things. "Only you would think of that." 3 days had passed since the tournament's end, and today was Sunday. Determined to keep a steady schedule, Harry had slipped away to the cave just outside Hogsmeade, intent on mastering a notoriously tricky brew. From a shuffled deck of potion cards, Ginny's steady hand had drawn the Polyjuice potion. It was ambitious, but Harry relished a challenge. He set out his ingredients methodically, wand at the ready. Steam curled from the cauldron's surface as he murmured the incantation. For a moment, everything seemed perfect, but then the potion turned chalky and gray, spluttering impotent, to lie at the rim. Harry sighed, dipping his wand into the failed mixture. He would have to try again. After all, mastery came to those who were willing to fail, and then try once more. Harry poured the discarded Polyjuice potion into the newly constructed waste treatment pool. From the shadows of the headmaster's office at Hogwarts, Lane watched a floating magical projection showing the mud-like liquid swirling into the basin. "Kate, look," he murmured, pointing to the image. Did Harry really fail his experiment? And did you notice those subtle wand movements? There were a couple, 2, if I'm counting right. If we can figure out what he did, I'll carry out your plan. Seated in Dumbledore's customary high-backed chair, Kate was now clad in the late headmaster's robes. He adjusted the half-moon spectacles perched on his nose, then spoke in a calm, measured tone. "Albus Kate Lewinster Dumbledore," he announced, assuming the name. "Show me." Lane swept his hand, and the projection zoomed in. This batch of polyjuice was far too toxic. Any ordinary wizard drinking it would have turned to sludge. But watch closely. When Ginny drew a card, Harry gave his wand a discreet flick, a transfiguration charm. Then, as Ginny slipped the card back into the deck, he flicked his wand again. 2 tiny gestures, but enough to neutralize the potion's toxicity. Kate rose from the chair, a knowing gleam in his eye. He offered Lane a sly wink. At that moment, Ryan shifted into a brilliant phoenix and alighted upon the tall gilded perch behind the office door, its fiery plumage crackling softly in the hush. "Nice catch. You've got sharp eyes." Even Ginny sitting next to Harry didn't notice, Phoenix Ryan said with a roll of her eyes. Kate, perched in the high-backed chair, frowned at her reflection. With a flick of her wand, Ryan produced a snow-white false beard tied with a pink ribbon and carefully fixed it beneath Kate's chin. "There, that's much better. All right, I admit it. You win. I'll let you be Dumbledore this time." Kate's eyes widened. Ryan hurriedly waved her wand again, shedding her own disguise. "Wait, don't call me Grindelwald. I'm not him." Unfazed, Kate climbed onto the long table and struck a pose, gesturing at herself. "So, how do I look as Dumbledore?" Ryan exhaled in relief. With a final flourish, she reshaped her outfit into a sleek black leather coat studded with metal accents, and even summoned a matching crutch. "Perfect. You're a convincing Dumbledore, and I've got the Grindelwald vibe down pat." Kate, now cloaked in sweeping scholarly robes with half-moon spectacles and the snowy beard, glanced down, cheeks flushing with embarrassment. She realized she'd lost simply because she'd compromised her own principles. Now the air around her felt charged, almost dangerous. Today, Penelope had taken leave to visit her aunt. She was delivering an advanced version of the Fenrir form, and without her, I wasn't sure how I'd manage. Fleur, for her part, had been glued to her sister's side lately, so she merely rolled her eyes and steered the conversation elsewhere. "It's clear Harry had this all mapped out from the start," I said. First, he transfigured the labels on all the vials to read Polyjuice Potion. Then he undid that transfiguration, returning the labels to their original state so Ginny wouldn't suspect a thing. But brewing Polyjuice properly takes a full month. Even if you follow the instructions perfectly, rushing the process to just a few hours makes the potion excessively toxic for any wizard. "Right," Fleur agreed. "And the ingredients themselves demand precision. Fluxweed must be harvested on the exact night of the full moon, and the lacewing flies have to be boiled for 20 days. Unless," she added with a smirk, "you manage to collect your fluxweed in advance during a full moon." She let that hang in the air, leaving me to wonder what other shortcuts Harry might have employed and what dangers they might bring. In the dim back room of the apothecary, 2 potion masters leaned over a row of steaming cauldrons. "Lacewings have already been simmering for 10 days, the taller of the 2 said, stirring slowly. "There are 10 days more to go, just enough time to bring the toxicity down to a level a normal wizard can tolerate. If the intended drinker has exceptional resistance, both to potions and to magic, it might only need a few hours of boiling. In that case, what we'd call a failed batch actually becomes a perfectly successful potion." His colleague raised an eyebrow. "So who's it for? Hagrid, perhaps?" "Hardly," the first man replied. "Hagrid's half-giant blood makes him fundamentally unsuitable for Polyjuice Potion. Giants aren't like Vila. Vila or half-Vila can transform without issue, because their blood is magically compatible with wizards. But giants aren't. You can reduce toxicity all you like. Polyjuice simply won't take." "So it must be a pure-blood wizard," the second mused. "Harry Potter, maybe? He's been studying blood exchange and heart-forging techniques from that forbidden text, The Method of Forging a Strong Heart." "True," the first man nodded. "If he's mastered those methods, his resistance would soar, shortening the final boil to mere hours. But it could be someone else. Ever hear of the Fenrir incarnation ritual? A lot of wizards have been trying to become wolf wizards lately." "Remus Lupin?" his companion suggested with a grin. His friend chuckled and shook his head. "Ha! Nice try. I did say the recipient is a pure wizard. Lupin, with his lycanthropy, is out of the question. The two exchanged knowing smiles, then returned their attention to the bubbling cauldrons, confident that in just 10 days, or perhaps a matter of hours, their concoction would be ready for a very singular client. It looks like I only received a single sentence. Could you please share the full chapter you'd like me to revise? Once I have the complete text, I can turn it into a polished, idiomatic English version for you. Chapter 204, The Unexpected Popularity of Hagrid. Lately, Hagrid had been in an inexplicably foul mood, even more mysterious because every morning a small crowd of students with no scheduled classes would gather outside his hut, craning their necks and whispering excitedly. Harry found the whole scene baffling. Not even Michael Corner, the Hogwarts student renowned for roaming other schools and collecting every scrap of gossip, had been able to uncover the reason. That all changed on a Friday morning in the Great Hall. Harry and Ron sat down to breakfast, smoked fish and bland white porridge, a meal that suited neither of them, especially so early in the day. As they pushed their food around their plates, Harry noticed Dean Thomas and Seamus Finnegan in earnest conversation at the table just behind them. Seamus, with his shock of light brown hair, was the boy who had stood beside Harry in the sorting queue. Although their timetables never aligned, they'd become fast friends. Harry knew Seamus best for one thing: his talent for turning the simplest spell into a spectacular explosion. Now Seamus's eyes were bright with excitement, and Dean was leaning in to listen. "What's up?" Harry leaned to Ron. Before Ron could answer, Seamus's voice carried across the table. "You'll never believe what Hagrid's been up to." Harry sat up a little straighter. Finally, the mystery might be solved. Harry couldn't shake his astonishment. No matter how many thunderbolt explosions Seamus Finnegan unleashed, his wand emerged unscathed. After hours of relentless practice, Seamus had perfected the spell to the point that he could cast it as naturally as breathing. Harry often wondered whether, if Seamus ever really let loose, he might blow the entire Great Hall to bits. Dean Thomas, sprawled on Seamus's canopied bed, chuckled and nudged Ron. "If it wasn't for Seamus being half Muggle, I'd have requested a new roommate by now," he teased. "He's so good at blowing things up that he's become a master at cleaning up the mess. No incantations needed. One flick of his wand and every soot stain disappears. Saves him a trip to the bathroom, too." Ron's eyebrows shot up. "He's practicing explosions in the dormitory?" "There's no great mystery," Harry explained. "On their corridor, the only fourth-year boys are Seamus and Dean, so they've got this enormous dorm all to themselves. I reckon it's one way to deal with overcrowding in Gryffindor Tower." Seamus tucked his wand into his robe pocket, grinning broadly. "Mum always says practice makes perfect, and it doesn't hurt to know a decent cleaning charm. She's a witch, Dad's a Muggle. He only discovered wizards and witches when he caught that Wizarding World show on TV. Now he's completely hooked, asks me to demonstrate every spell I learn." Ron shook his head in disbelief as the last wisps of smoke drifted from the charred ceiling. For all the chaos Seamus created, there was no denying his talent and his knack for getting away with it. That afternoon, during the televised magical creature showcase, Harry and Ron slipped over to Seamus Finnegan's house to watch with him. Seamus's father, a devoted Muggle who spent more waking hours in front of a screen than in any armchair, immediately spotted the disclaimer scrolling beneath the footage. Warning: the fire dragons featured in this broadcast have been domesticated through the unique magic of Rubeus Hagrid, Hogwarts resident magizoologist. Minors should view only under parental supervision. Do not attempt to replicate any content seen here. Mr. Finnegan was so taken with the idea that he sat Seamus down and dictated a letter by hand. He urged his son to apprentice himself to Hagrid's class in magical biology, so that one day he might tame a fire dragon himself, free enough not to require restraints, intelligent enough to heed human speech, and tame enough to perch at their own front gate. He even fantasized that, once the Wizarding and Muggle governments forged formal diplomatic ties, every family would keep its personal fire dragon as a guard beast and ride it to and from work. Back at Hogwarts, Harry and Ron heard rumors of Mr. Finnegan's grand designs and finally understood Hagrid's extraordinary popularity with parents everywhere. Letters and fan mail kept piling onto Hagrid's desk, all sparked by the brief warning at the bottom of that magical broadcast. By the time December rolled in, Hogwarts itself was buffeted by squally winds, sleet, and swirling snow, an apt backdrop to the season of miracles and to dreams of dragons on the doorstep. Despite the winter's constant drafts, Harry never ceased to be grateful for Hogwarts's roaring hearths and thick stone walls, especially when he passed the ironclad ship of Durmstrang moored on the Black Lake or gazed at the towering redwoods imported from Castrobusha. Outside, the wind whipped through the branches, sending the vessel careening against its anchor, its black sails snapping like tattered banners against the night sky. Harry shivered, picturing how bitterly cold it must be in those floating dormitories, no place he'd ever want to spend the winter. Inside the makeshift stables where Hagrid held his care of magical creatures class, the atmosphere was different. Warmer, yes, but tinged with a sweeter, headier scent. Despite being hounded by an eager crowd of students, Hagrid was still slipping Madame Maxime's massive horses small measures of single-distilled whiskey. The spirit's tang drifted from the corner trough, and more than one witch or wizard emerged looking a bit unsteady. Those unaware of Hagrid's little secret simply assumed the animals were in an unusually cheerful mood. In the haze of good spirits, students jostled for position, all clamoring to admire and touch Hagrid's latest charge, a hulking, wide-headed creature sensationally nicknamed the Russian Devil. Hagrid, of course, maintained there was nothing devilish about it. "Just look at that head," a Ravenclaw girl exclaimed, pressing her palm against the fence. "It's enormous and all wrinkled. He's adorable. May I pet him?" "Me too, please," another piped up, edging forward. Hagrid grinned and tousled their hair. "Easy now. Just watch his mouth. He's a great big softy once he's had his nip." For a moment, Hogwarts's drafty corridors and biting winds felt worlds away as laughter and excitement filled the cozy stable. You may also hear it referred to simply as him, though it's far from popular. True to its name, this creature's head is grotesquely oversized, bald, smooth, and so round it could be mistaken for polished stone. Its facial features are all but erased, leaving only faint, flattened contours. The rest of its body stands no more than a foot tall, covered in coarse, woolly fur that gives it an ape-like appearance. What makes this little monster truly chilling is its stealth. It can trail a human for hours without ever being seen, its solid gray, pupilless eyes fixed on its prey. The moment it locks eyes with you, you'll feel a subtle but insistent unease, as though someone is watching your every move. This creature's hunting strategy relies entirely on that unnerving stare. It follows a victim until anxiety and hopelessness overwhelm them. When the person finally collapses, sinking to their knees or slumping to the ground in tears, the big-headed, woolly predator strikes, attempting to devour them on the spot. Unsurprisingly, this monster is universally unwelcome. Still, as Hagrid was quick to reassure us in class, despite its fearsome reputation, it's actually quite easy to handle, if you know what you're doing. Honestly, you could just kick it or hit it. That's all a muggle needs to drive one off, Ron said with a shrug. If you're a wizard and want a bit of flair, cast a simple poison jinx or a stupefy. But don't think that gives you a free pass on guilt. Even Harry couldn't keep a straight face. Ron's right, but imagine if people knew this was less a spell and more an inherited gift, something like the Vila bloodline. Would they still mock it so casually? Neville scowled. He wasn't in the mood, especially since Hannah had been making it clear she fancied him. Only yesterday she'd boasted, "I'm going to build my pub on top of a dragon someday. Even a basic Welsh green will do as a bouncer." "I'm in trouble," Neville muttered. "Maybe I should just tell her Hagrid's secret." Both Harry and Ron shook their heads. "No way," Harry warned. "Hannah can't keep a secret to save her life." Neville threw up his hands. "Look, I didn't grow up in the wizarding world, but I know how they treat anyone with odd blood. Vila-blooded witches and wizards, they're admired for their beauty, so no one dares insult them outright. But that silent discrimination, it's always there." Fleur was absolutely breathtaking, and her design had just taken first place in this round of the competition. Yet, oddly enough, her merchandise wasn't selling nearly as well as you'd expect. By contrast, Harry's lineup had flown off the shelves and sat firmly at number 1. Whispers even floated about Hagrid's true heritage, If fans ever learned he was a half-giant, his products might sell out in hours. Of course, his strength comes equally from his wizarding blood, but that part of his story remained a well-guarded secret. Neville glanced over at Harry and raised an eyebrow. "You're practically showing off your chest on those posters," he pointed out with a grin. "Do you think women are driving all those sales? And honestly, no one's even clued into Hagrid's half-giant lineage yet. His magical side would be just as big a draw once it gets out." Harry shrugged, smirking. "Everyone's got their specialty, Neville." Author's note: I'm currently in Chongqing, so I can only check in about every 3 days. Thanks for your patience. I'll post the next chapter as soon as I can. Chapter 205. The Upcoming Christmas Ball. The corridors of Hogwarts were alive with excitement, and a fair share of gossip, as the Christmas ball drew near. Rumors had already begun to swirl about just who would or wouldn't attend. Neville Longbottom found himself reluctantly spilling one juicy tidbit that might help quiet the speculation on at least one front. "Did you tell Hannah?" Ron Weasley prodded him as they rounded the corner by the Charms classroom. Neville shrugged. "She's hopeless at keeping secrets, as you said, but putting the real story in her hands might squash some of the other crazy rumors." Harry Potter, who'd been walking just behind them, flashed Neville an exasperated look. He was more than ready to change the subject. After all, he'd just been ambushed by questions about the merchandise line bearing his name, wizarding robes, cauldrons, even a specialty stain remover. He'd spent most of the afternoon rehearsing a polite refusal, only to find himself curiously dizzy by the end of it all. "Honestly," Harry muttered under his breath, "I never asked for any of this." Neville glanced at him sympathetically. "You're the perfect poster boy," he said, "so you get stuck promoting the lot." Harry winced. The pièce de résistance of his new merchandise was the ink bottle. Its label featured a small animated portrait of him on the Quidditch pitch, his robe ripping in mid-match, muscles straining, torso bare. And that was only the start. The Design Your Own feature on the online store gave buyers free rein to choose from countless angles, all of them, Harry noted grimly, revealing far more flesh than he would have liked. "I'm not sure why I didn't just opt out of the customization," he grumbled. "Now everyone can pick their favorite version of me, naked." Before he could dwell on it further, Victor Crumb and Ernie Macmillan breezed past, each carrying a stack of their own promotional catalogs. "I heard their lines are totally different," Neville said, nodding at the other two. Crumb's catalog lets you pick from 3 animations: calling his broom with one hand, streaking across the sky in shadow form, or jumping off the broomstick after a win. And Ernie, well, Ernie's done potions kits, chocolate frogs, you name it. Harry watched them walk away with a mixture of envy and relief. At least Victor got the variety right. At least Ernie stuck to more modest offerings. "Next time," Harry sighed, "I'll negotiate better terms." Ron patted him on the shoulder. "First things first, let's get ready for the ball. We'll deal with the merch mayhem after we've danced the night away." Harry managed a genuine smile. Rumors, endorsements, unexpected labels aside, the Yule Ball was still a chance to celebrate, together, and for a moment he set aside his worries about bare-chested ink bottles and focused on the warmth of friendship that made Hogwarts feel like home. Irviz's line was simply unmatched. His enchanted animations ran longer than anyone else's, and somehow even included a full donkey roll. Puzzled by how he'd managed such sophistication, Harry penned a letter to the Skywalker Alchemy Workshop. Had Irviz secretly downloaded Harry's personal design sketches? The workshop's reply arrived a week later, not with schematics, but with an astonishingly detailed data report. It turned out they'd recorded every flicker of his expression on the Quidditch pitch, every frown, every grin, even the subtlest tremor of his muscles. The raw data behind their portraits of Harry dwarfed anything any other vendor had access to. In short, no one else could come close to matching that level of precision. And since Harry never wore his team robes during those particular plays, there was nothing he could change to alter the footage. Reluctantly, he let it be. The result? Suddenly, every witch at Hogwarts was decking out her satchel with charms showing his rippling biceps, the torn edge of his skirt, and an animated 3D likeness that winked and flexed on command. Ginny Weasley was the biggest fan, no surprise there, followed by Colin Creevey. Yes, that very same Colin Creevey, now a certified wizard and just as obsessed as everyone else. Harry was halfway to mortified until Michael found out that Colin wasn't interested in men romantically. That fact alone was a relief. He'd never guessed his male admirers could be so fervent. Anthony Wood alone wrote that he'd do absolutely anything for Harry's sake. And somehow, that was the most surprising detail of all. Harry frowned as he browsed the display by the library's entrance. I can't see Anthony ever buying these. They're far too philosophical for him. But he didn't have time to dwell on that. No sooner had Charms class ended than Professor Flitwick hopped onto his little stool, clearing his throat for attention. Good afternoon, everyone, Flitwick began, voice bubbling with excitement. I'm pleased to announce the return of the Yule Ball, a long-standing tradition of the Triwizard Tournament and a splendid opportunity to mingle with our international guests. Attendance is open to third-year students and above, though you may invite one younger partner if you wish. Hermione's eyes lit up at the news, but beside her, Ron rolled his eyes so hard, Harry thought they might get stuck. That single gesture told Harry everything he needed to know. Ron wasn't going to weasel out of this one. Most of Ron's usual dates were already old enough to attend without an invitation, and even Luna, technically a second year, could go if Ron simply asked. Seriously unfair, Ron muttered under his breath. Harry smiled inwardly. In the original timeline, the Yule Ball had been reserved strictly for fourth years and above. Now, in his third year, Harry himself was eligible, one small rule change that could have big repercussions. Of course, Dumbledore had arranged it. The old headmaster was nothing if not clever. He probably hoped a bit of festive dancing might help Harry find, well, something more than Quidditch in his life. Harry tucked the thought away and straightened up. Yule Ball or not, there would be plenty of time to worry about romance later. For now, he just hoped Anthony would finally branch out and buy something a bit less philosophical. After all, love is the greatest magic of all, and the surest way to master your spells is to fall in love. It's a truth Voldemort, that lifelong bachelor, can never understand. And since Harry had always shared a closer bond with Dumbledore than the old wizard's own family, the headmaster naturally rolled out the red carpet for him. Meanwhile, at the front of the classroom, Professor Flitwick beamed as he continued his announcement. Now, listen carefully. Make sure you've got your dress robes ready. The Yule Ball will be held in the Great Hall on Christmas Eve. We'll begin at 8 o'clock and dance until midnight. He hopped down from his stack of textbooks, his makeshift podium, and waved his wand excitedly. This celebration is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. With our tournament's Final Four all here, it's the first and quite possibly only time we'll ever host a ball like this. Even if the ball returns in future years, you'll likely be alumni by then, unless, of course, it comes back only for the Triwizard Tournament. At that moment, the bell rang. Every student, except for Ryan, who was still being peppered by Hermione's non-stop questions, looked utterly bewildered. Books were hastily shoved back into bags, straps were yanked over shoulders, and the room erupted into the familiar end-of-class scramble. Professor Flitwick's tiny voice rose above the clamor in the hallway. Harry, would you stay a moment? I have a few words to say to you. Harry, who had been about to cross the threshold and join Ryan, who looked as if he'd just uncovered something extraordinary, hesitated. Hermione, already half out the door, caught his sleeve and gently steered him back inside. Ron had tried to linger as well, but Neville dragged him off, insisting he shouldn't miss dinner. Once the last of the other students had filed out, leaving only Harry and the diminutive professor in the empty classroom, Flitwick cleared his throat. Right, Harry, the champions and their partners. Partners? Harry echoed, blinking in confusion. Flitwick chuckled, tussling Harry's hair with unexpected strength. Your partner for the Yule Ball, of course. Honestly, I nearly forgot. You're engaged, aren't you? To Ginny Weasley of your house. Harry felt his cheeks flame. It was the first time a professor had so openly acknowledged his engagement to Ginny. Dance partner? He stammered. Right, it must be Ginny. Only, I can't dance. The professor's eyes twinkled behind his spectacles. Nonsense. A little practice and you'll manage splendidly. Miss Weasley will be most appreciative, and you'll want to make a fine impression." Harry swallowed, still flushed but determined. "I'll do my best, Professor." Flitwick gave him an encouraging nod. "That's all anyone can ask. Now run along. You've got plenty of time before the ball. And Harry? Yes? Try not to keep your partner waiting." With that, Flitwick held open the door, and a slightly shell-shocked but resolute Harry stepped back into the corridor, already turning over dance steps in his mind. "Come on, you have to dance," Professor Flitwick said, his eyes twinkling. Harry blinked. No, the little wizard wasn't blinking at him. He was brimming with excitement. "Ginny will teach you. Girls pick up dancing more quickly, and by tradition, the champions always open the ball with their partners." Harry's mind leapt ahead. The hall hushed, enchanted goblets raised in salute, the portraits leaning forward to watch as he and Ginny took the floor. The music would swell, they'd glide together, and how romantic that would be. But a wave of embarrassment swept over him. "Do we really have to lead?" he asked, voice tight. "I mean, I'll dance with her for sure, but if we're the first ones out there, everyone will be staring. Ginny's so shy, I'm not sure she'd manage." A small, determined voice cut in from behind him. "I can! Ginny!" Harry's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't noticed when she slipped into the room, but there she stood, right behind him, her eyes bright and resolute. Professor Flitwick beamed, as if he'd anticipated this all along. "Ah, Miss Weasley is more than capable. And what do you say, Harry?" He blinked at Harry once more. This time, Harry was certain the professor's hopeful gaze was meant just for him. "I know you faced down a dragon, Harry," she said, leaning in conspiratorially. "Surely tearing off your robes in public is a small thing by comparison. It's tradition, after all. You're Hogwarts champion, our standard-bearer. You owe it to the school to meet their expectations. You don't want us to lose face in front of the other schools, do you? Can you imagine them whispering that our champion was too chicken to start the ball?" Chapter 206, Popular Warriors. The staff lounge was quiet when Professor Dumbledore's eyes popped open. "What, Phileas, you've made Harry the lead dancer?" Professor Flitwick, perched on a high-backed chair, lowered his spectacles and nodded. "Yes, Headmaster. Since we're hosting this tournament at Hogwarts, I thought it would be fitting for Harry and his partner not just to open the ball, but to lead the entire dance. They'll be front and center, guiding everyone through the steps." Dumbledore paced slowly. Opening the dance simply means being the first to step onto the floor, but the lead dancer holds the center stage and directs the others. "Well, it does sound impressive. Very well, Phileas, but you must keep a close watch on Harry's progress. Consider it part of his assignments this term. After all, last I heard, he can't dance to save his life." Flitwick grinned. "I'll see to it, Headmaster. Harry won't embarrass himself, at least not too much." Underneath that confident smile lay the true architect of the plan, Ryan, one of Flitwick's most promising charm students, who had casually suggested it during class. So far, only a handful of people knew the full details. Kate, Hogwarts Inquisitor, and Fleur Delacour, who'd been informed by Madame Maxime at Beauxbatons. And once Kate was in the know, Penello naturally heard it all too. With the decision made, the greatest dance Hogwarts had ever seen was poised to begin, with Harry Potter leading the way. Ryan could barely escape the eager clutches of 4 girls all vying to be his dance partner. But tonight, he was in a mischievous mood, and a single name danced through his mind: Harry. With a sardonic grin, Ryan trained his gaze on the bewildered Gryffindor. Before Harry knew what was happening, Ryan had decreed that he would lead the opening dance of the evening, forcing him to master a complex routine he'd never wanted to learn. To ensure Hogwarts didn't suffer any social embarrassment, Harry was ordered to rehearse in Professor Flitwick's presence at regular intervals. Of course, Ryan's little stunt had nothing to do with Albus Dumbledore. The headmaster, in fact, relished a bit of light-hearted fun. A devoted fan of the Harry Potter novels, Ryan had made it his personal project to observe Dumbledore's every move, every single moment, save those rare trips to the loo. Over time, he'd come to know the legendary wizard better than Dumbledore knew himself. Yet there would be no lingering triumph tonight. By his side stood Furong, a fierce warrior eager to claim her share of the spotlight. And with her joining him on the dance floor, Ryan could no longer rely on his secret magic to send the rest of the school tumbling into oblivion. The ball had only just begun, and already the real show was about to start. I dreaded having to unmask myself again, just as I had the first time I slipped into the branch. Unsurprisingly, the other witches couldn't help shooting Hermione envious glances. How would she and her friends handle that kind of scrutiny? Thankfully, my alter ego, Helena, was far more confident, a second identity perfectly at ease with deception. And at least we still had 2 weeks before the Yule Ball. I couldn't shake the feeling that a year's worth of bad luck had finally caught up with me. Had Professor Trelawney's ominous Jupiter prediction, warning I'd be trapped in a dark mood all month, already come true? To make matters worse, Professor Flitwick had just reminded us how crucial it was for the boys to lead their partners on the dance floor. He'd even arranged for a senior Ravenclaw girl to give us private dance lessons. I learned she and Terry were good friends, which at least made the introduction painless, but I still found the whole affair dreadfully dull. If my body hadn't been altered by the polyjuice potion, simply stretching into the first dance position would have felt like torture. And the Ravenclaw's boundless enthusiasm only drove home how much I dreaded the upcoming ball. Since Harry had surprised everyone by winning the race, after all, he was the fastest. A full-blown Harry Potter craze erupted across Hogwarts. His face was plastered on mugs, posters, scarves. Merchandise flew off the shelves. In the lounge beneath the dome, sky-blue banners sprinkled with silver stars now framed a new image of Harry. Gripping the tail of a Hungarian horntail and swinging it in a colossal arc, the very impact denting the stone floor beneath him. It was the same raw power he'd shown in every previous task. Word spread quickly about the next tournament challenge, and Ravenclaw's self-styled intellectual elite were determined to join Harry's inner circle. No sooner had he stepped into their common room than eager students pressed him. "Show us your earmuffs. Let us see those dragon tail charms." A few purists objected, but the tournament rules say he must solve the clues alone. Yet they were drowned out by the majority clamoring to crack the puzzle together. The trouble was that Harry already knew what the next task would be, but he'd sworn Hagrid to secrecy and didn't dare break that promise. Besides, there was nothing overtly magical about the earmuffs. He tried them himself and admitted they were incredibly warm, perfect for warding off the chill, but to any bystander, they looked like nothing more than high-quality winter headgear. The threads held an odd shimmer, but none of the Ravenclaws seemed to notice. So the students cornered him day after day, convinced that some hidden inscription or secret mechanism lay in his gear. Harry only smiled and deflected their questions, quietly preparing himself for whatever the next challenge might bring. Alone, as the rules intended. Harry stared down at the earmuffs in his hands. At first glance, they seemed nothing more than a cozy, fur-lined winter accessory, and the small fire dragon figurine propped beside them? Surely, just a clever toy. Yet when he carried them back to the Gryffindor common room that evening, he discovered there was nothing ordinary about either gift. As the fire crackled, the tiny dragon, Xiaolong, as Harry had quietly begun calling it, lifted its delicate head, let out a soft yawn, and curled up in the circular earmuffs as if they were made just for it. Moments later, it closed its eyes, settled its claws, and drifted into a peaceful slumber. Harry grinned. At last, he understood exactly what Hagrid had been talking about when he praised the cuteness of dragons. Despite all the tales of their fierceness, here was a creature as innocent and endearing as any kitten or puppy. But if Xiaolong's innocence brought Harry comfort, the reaction of the Hogwarts student body did not. Ever since the Yule Ball had been announced, the castle felt more crowded than ever. Nearly every third year and above had chosen to stay over Christmas, and with them came an unprecedented surge of attention focused squarely on Harry. He'd never realized how many witches were on campus until now. In the corridors, clusters of giggling girls whispered and exchanged excited glances whenever he passed. They chatted in low voices about which gown they'd wear on Christmas Eve, what jewelry would dazzle most by candlelight, and, to Harry's growing dismay, how he might escort one of them to the end-of-term feast. Almost every time he ventured from the common room, some hopeful student would thrust a worn notebook at him, its pages brimming with animated sketches of his famous lightning bolt scar, complete with dramatized tears in his collar. "Harry, will you sign this?" they'd ask, cheeks flushed. And then, as if that weren't enough, they'd slip him invitations to private holiday gatherings or late-night feasts. Ginny watched it all with mounting frustration. She loved Harry, of course, but between the adorable little dragon snoozing by the hearth and the swarm of admirers vying for his attention, she found herself stewing with jealousy at every turn. Harry sighed, stroking Xiaolong's tiny snout as the dragon stirred in its earmuff nest. Christmas at Hogwarts had always been special, but this year, with a baby dragon asleep by his side and half the castle clamoring for his company, it promised to be the most extraordinary one yet. From then on, whenever she had a free moment, she'd find a way to shadow him, circling him like a lioness patrolling her territory. The other champions were just as popular. Take Krum, for example, who rivaled Elvis in admirers. But Elvis had the advantage of foresight and rarely ventured beyond his college, so he faced almost no competition and quickly secured a dance partner from among his own classmates. Krum's story was different. Because of Grindelwald's influence at Durmstrang, none of the local girls would even consider dancing with him, despite his fame growing until it nearly matched Harry's. Victor spent every day tucked away in the library under Mrs. Pince's watchful eye, and any girl who showed up to catch a glimpse of him dared not breathe too loudly. Krum seemed unperturbed, until Harry, playing the loyal friend, discovered who Victor had finally asked to the Yule Ball. The girl already had a steady boyfriend whose bond with her was so strong that no newcomer could break it. As a result, Victor's offer had been turned down more than a dozen times. If Harry didn't know Victor well, he might have suspected his friend had developed a peculiar taste for pursuing only those who were already spoken for. Ron had told him that Krum was almost ready to abandon his search for a Yule Ball partner. He decided to pick from the few girls who'd followed him into the library, the honest one, and the final champion, Fleur Delacour. Harry knew from the start that none of the others stood a chance. Victor's only real choice was Fleur. Still, around the gleaming Beauxbaton's carriage at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, eager students clustered, each hoping to be the one to ask her to dance. Among them were Harry's own Quidditch teammates, Roger, Henry, Phoenix, Bradley, and Richard. Other than Qizhang, they weren't half bad. Chapter 650, Weird Snape. Harry winced at the thought of Cho Chang. The girl who had briefly captured his heart was now the second member of Gryffindor's Quidditch team to secure a Yule Ball partner, and her choice was none other than Cedric Diggory, captain of the Hufflepuff squad. Harry knew from first-hand experience that Cedric was a stand-up fellow. Anyone who played as fairly as he did couldn't be all bad. Yet every time Harry saw him striding across the courtyard, an irrational urge to punch him sparked within Harry's chest. Worse still, he couldn't confide this petty jealousy to Ron, not with Ginny tangled up in the whole affair. If Harry admitted how raw he felt, Ron would side with Cedric in a heartbeat, insisting Harry focus on Ginny instead and give Cho a clear run. Harry tried to pin down the source of his bitterness. He wondered if it was Ryan's influence. He'd been clinging to Harry all day, filling Harry's head with improbable daydreams about Cho Chang, even Mrs. Grey. Or perhaps it was the lingering residue of Voldemort's magic still twisting his emotions. After all, the dark mark in his mind had once made him fall for Bellatrix Lestrange. Yet neither Cho nor Cedric stirred Harry's feelings as much as one other person, Dudley. Ever since potions class that afternoon, Harry found himself distracted by thoughts of his cousin, though why, he couldn't say. As the late afternoon bell rang through the dungeons, Harry squared his shoulders and tucked away those forbidden worries. Tomorrow, he promised himself, he'd tame this mess of emotions, no matter how weird Snape's next lesson might be. Harry wove through the throng in the corridor and froze when he realized what was happening. Dudley had been invited, by a fifth-year girl, no less. She was strikingly pretty and at least a foot taller than Dudley, and from her confident tone, it was clear that if he dared refuse, she wouldn't have taken it lightly. Even more surprising, Dudley had actually agreed. Merlin's beard, Dudley, the golden boy of Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia, was skipping the Dursleys' Christmas celebrations to spend the holiday with a witch? Harry pictured how Vernon and Petunia would react if they ever found out. He felt a wicked impulse to write them at once, to tell them Dudley had gone off with a wizarding schoolgirl. But he pushed the thought aside. They'd only excuse Dudley, just as they always did whenever he brought home bad grades, picked fights, or grew impossibly huge. Dudley just doesn't like studying. He's got other talents. He'll turn out fine, they'd say. Dudley's such a gentle boy, he wouldn't hurt a fly. He's simply big-boned. And this time? Harry could already hear them crowing. Our Dudley's far too manly to be left at home alone. He shook his head, sidestepped a group of first years, and kept moving, curious to see how far Dudley's new invitation would carry him. Hardly anyone lingered in front of Hagrid's hut anymore. Word had spread like wildfire after Neville let Hannah Abbott in on Hagrid's secret. No one, not even the witches, could avoid hearing about it. Yet instead of causing an uproar, the news only seemed to bolster Hagrid's reputation as an eccentric but brilliant magizoologist. After all, if Newt Scamander could tame a curly-winged demon that nibbled on human brains, what was Hagrid's collection of odd creatures but par for the course? Students merely shrugged and imagined him lugging crate after crate of magical beasts through the Forbidden Forest. Believe it or not, this was the only bit of good news Harry had had all week. Everything else felt as if it were rushing past him, and before he knew it, it was already the last week of term. The castle buzzed with talk of the end-of-term dance. Who would ask whom, what dress robes would be worn, and how best to practice the steps. Yet, in the flurry of whispered invitations through the corridors, Harry remained conspicuously unasked. Ginny, too, found herself free of dance partners, but Ron was no such luck. He was positively swamped. First, he decided to make and sell smoke bombs to earn back the galleons he'd spent on custom-tailored dress robes for himself and Lavender. Then he insisted on nightly dance lessons with Lavender Brown to ensure they looked perfect at the ball. Harry watched his best friend bustle about and couldn't help but smile. At least Ron had something, or someone, to keep him busy when the rest of them were too distracted by rumors and end-of-term exams to notice. Dancing in those gorgeous gowns was too tempting to pass up. That's why Ron, ever eager to impress, signed up with Lavender Brown for Professor Flitwick's Yule Ball dance lessons, alongside Harry and Ginny. Draco Malfoy, for his part, was equally occupied. Pansy Parkinson made sure of that. Neville Longbottom, determined not to let Hannah Abbott down, practiced every evening too. Even Seamus Finnegan had disappeared for hours with his girlfriends, though whispers in the corridors hinted at tension between him and Hermione. Her pointed comments about Fleur Delacour made it clear something was amiss. With most Ravenclaws abandoning the Triwizard puzzle hunt until after the second task, Harry found himself with plenty of free time to linger by the common room fire and gather gossip. Rumor had Dumbledore quietly purchasing 800 barrels of mead from Madame Rosmerta at the Three Broomsticks. Other chatter suggested the Weird Sisters would be playing at the ball, a tale that turned out to be true, if somewhat misleading. Harry eventually discovered the band was made up entirely of men. They'd become something of a sensation on the Wizard Wireless Network, and now rumors swirled that they were in talks with Skywalker's Alchemy Workshop, possibly even angling for a spot on a magical television program. Word had even reached a few of their professors, who noticed how distracted the students were and quite literally threw up their hands. Take Professor Flitwick, head of their house. Rather than scold them for daydreaming, he turned his cushion charm lesson into an impromptu game. On Thursday, everyone took turns leaping from the highest podium onto a pile of enchanted pillows. Afterward, Flitwick and Harry found themselves deep in conversation about the remarkable flying hex that Victor Krum had unleashed during the first task of the Triwizard Tournament. According to Krum's later interview in the Daily Prophet, it was Harry's own suggestion. Not every teacher was so easygoing, of course. Professor Binns, now nothing more than a ghost, persisted in lecturing on the ancient giants' rebellion with the same unhurried, dreary tone he'd used in life. His voice was so monotonous that almost the entire class drifted off within minutes. Hardly surprising, given how few hours of sleep everyone was getting with the Yule Ball fast approaching. Professor McGonagall's sharp voice carried to every corner of the classroom. I expect fully detailed transfigurations on my desk by the end of the hour, Mr. Potter. Tom Riddle inclined his head once. Miss Granger, your wand work must be precise. There is no room for error. Despite the last-minute bell, neither professor let their students slack off. Harry suspected Riddle was exacting some quiet revenge on the girls who'd been badgering him to serve as an extra dance partner for the Yule Ball, an arrangement no student was supposed to request of a professor. McGonagall watched each student's progress with unerring scrutiny, and the class worked furiously at quill and wand until the very second the bell finally rang. Half an hour later, Harry trudged into the potions dungeon for Professor Snape's lesson, bracing himself. From the moment Snape entered, it was clear he was in a foul mood, like a barrel of gunpowder, just waiting for a spark. With dark eyes flashing, he began lashing out at almost everyone. "Miss Brown, do you intend to brew Felix Felicis or a stinking swamp water?" he hissed, sweeping the room with a contemptuous glare. "Mr. Finch Fletchley, I believe you've used 3 times the required asphodel. Have you forgotten we want a restorative draught, not a deadly concoction?" Harry and his cousin Dudley, housed here by special arrangement, escaped unscathed, but Ron was in the eye of Snape's storm. Nearly every stingingly sarcastic comment was aimed at him. "Weasley, perhaps you'd like to explain why your cauldron is smoking like a firework. Do tell, so we may all marvel at your technique. Honestly, if you can't follow the recipe, you should consider keeping your warnings to the goblins in Diagon Alley." By the time Snape interrogated them a final time, Ron looked ready to vanish into his seat. Harry leaned over and whispered an answer to a question Snape had posed earlier, and Snape cut him off with a wave of his wand. Just when it seemed he'd returned to his usual torrent of insults, he paused, and, with everyone holding their breath, allowed himself a single grudging remark to Ron. "Well done, Weasley. That was sufficiently clever." For a split second, the room fell silent. A few students even blinked as if they'd misheard. Then Snape swept past the desks, expression unrateable, and left them to their pounding hearts and muttered wonderings. Outside the dungeon, Ron kicked at a loose flagstone, his face flushed. "He's impossible," he grumbled. "He spends the entire lesson tearing us down. Then, out of nowhere, he tosses me a scrap of praise like I'm some grateful stray dog." Harry folded his arms. "He didn't sound proud of you. It was more angry than generous." Ron stopped, staring at Harry. "Angry? At me? I always thought he just hated everyone equally, except for Potter, of course." Harry shook his head. "He didn't praise me at all today. That little remark, whatever you call it, was aimed at you, and it didn't sound like kindness." Ron ran a hand through his hair and exhaled. "Well, I suppose I should feel honored, then, to be the potions master's one halfway decent student." As a cold breeze rattled the castle windows, Harry glanced back down the corridor where Snape had disappeared. There was something in Snape's tone, more than hostility, almost fury, and Harry couldn't shake the feeling that Ron's brief moment of approval might be connected to a secret neither of them yet understood. He looked exhausted, and I caught Professor Snape casting a rare, respectful glance at Ryan. "This can't be," Ron blurted, shaking his head furiously. "Harry, you've got it all wrong. Only those of us who really know Lane understand him, and that's because he wants to be watched. Snape, don't be ridiculous. He hasn't earned a scrap of credit here." Chapter 208, Medicine Garden. Nestled among the European-style wings of the Smith Castle complex stands an unexpectedly Eastern pavilion. Crafted entirely from rare Huanghuali wood, its subtly curved roof and warm, honeyed grain lend it an air of classical mystery. Over the heavy double doors hangs a carved sign bearing the Chinese characters for Medicine Garden. Pushing open the entrance, you're greeted by a dry, bittersweet aroma, the unmistakable scent of traditional Chinese herbs. The first chamber's walls are a grid of small, meticulously labeled drawers. Inside each lies a different medicinal ingredient: dried roots, fragrant barks, powdered minerals. The air here is still, with no hint of moisture, as if preserving the precious herbs against decay. Through a curtained doorway lies a second room of a very different nature. Cool and slightly claustrophobic, it smells of formalin, and everywhere you look, rows of transparent glass jars line the shelves. Suspended in pale fluid are the organs of strange exotic creatures, coiled intestines, spotted livers, gnarled hearts, each specimen catalogued with precise clinical care. To the uninitiated, this might more resemble a mortuary than an apothecary. At the pavilion's far end is a third, final chamber, a fusion of the two preceding spaces. The air here remains dry, free of steam or mist, yet one entire wall is once again devoted to glass jars of odd anatomical curiosities. Opposite them stand clusters of wooden drawers filled with herbal powders and whole roots. In this hybrid lab, ancient herbal traditions and macabre preservation techniques coexist in uneasy harmony, as though the secrets of life and death are stored side by side. Ryan stepped into a softly lit corridor that branched into 3 adjacent chambers. Along each wall stood glass jars, empty of liquid but filled instead with dried animal parts, bleached bones, sharpened claws, curled scales. Against the center of this triangular space, an alchemist's toolkit was laid out in meticulous order. Crucibles of varying sizes, brass scales, fine-tipped tweezers, obsidian knives, and an array of mortars and pestles. This, he knew, was Ryan's private repository for potion ingredients. The first chamber held seeds of rare flora, night-blooming roses, silverleaf basil, and the elusive spirit lotus, each prized for its potent medicinal properties. In the second, rows of storage vials emitted a faint, formalin-like scent. Inside, glands and organs from magical beasts remained perfectly preserved, ready to lend their life essence to complex elixirs. The third room was kept cool and arid, ideal for air drying. Shelves displayed African tree snake skins, polished bezoar stones, dragon claws, bicorn horns, and a spectrum of glittering minerals. Despite the custom feel of these rooms, Ryan hadn't personally engineered their design. He'd yet to immerse himself in herbalism or in crafting potions that didn't directly bolster his strength. Instead, this laboratory ran under the guidance of his main god, the second soul within him, as the Xianxia sages would say. Of course, Ryan himself could take over at any time, but for now, he was content to let his other self oversee the delicate alchemical work. Ryan had deliberately steered clear of every potion and herbology text, determined to keep his lessons engaging rather than dull. And yet here stood this gleaming laboratory, a complete repository of every magical ingredient needed for potion making. Of all who knew Ryan's true identity, only one could claim genuine mastery over potions: Severus Snape. For the sake of resurrecting Lily Evans, Snape had even permitted Ryan to enjoy hot pot in the midst of class. He'd given up his own free time, burning the midnight oil well before Christmas, and tapped into Smith's connections and financial resources to bring this facility to life. After all, Snape could down an energy drought as though it were water. But gathering and organizing every potion recipe in the world, and then classifying each ingredient by type, animal or plant, condition, dry or fresh, and nature, biological or mineral, was a monumental undertaking. Every substance had to be prepped according to its unique properties. Even with house elves on hand and advanced magic circles at his disposal, it was a Herculean task, one beyond the skill of a simple brewer like Harry. As Harry looked over at Snape, he saw the dark circles under his eyes and knew his former potions master was truly exhausted. The final week before Christmas at Hogwarts always teetered between festive excitement and relentless academic pressure, but for Professor Severus Snape, only the latter truly mattered. Never one to show mercy, he drove his students mercilessly, even calling Neville Longbottom to the front of the class to lecture him on Lily Potter's death as if it were some grim incentive for improvement. Despite evergreen wreaths hung in the corridors and the faint scent of roasting chestnuts in the air, Snape refused to relax his standards. His potion assignments only grew more elaborate by the day, each demanding rare ingredients, perfect timing, and meticulous attention to detail, hardly the light holiday work a young witch or wizard might have hoped for. Yet, as severe as Snape appeared, his harshness sprang from a larger vision, one championed by the headmaster himself. Albus Dumbledore, in his characteristic generosity, had poured a small fortune of gold galleons into a brand-new greenhouse devoted entirely to cultivating the rarest magical herbs. Who else would invest so lavishly in their staff's success? To ensure no one wasted time bedridden over the holidays, he even supplied the potion masters with ample quantities of restorative draughts. It wasn't mere extravagance, Dumbledore maintained, but thoughtful stewardship, giving every witch and wizard at Hogwarts the tools and well-being they needed to excel. Outside, winter wrapped the castle in silence. Snow drifted over battlements and cloaked the forbidden forest in white. In the courtyard, Beauxbaton's pale blue carriage stood frozen beneath a shimmering layer of frost, its gilded wheels and ornate arches turned to crystal in the cold, like some enormous enchanted pumpkin abandoned to the elements. Students hurried past, scarves pulled tight, exchanging hurried goodnights, while Hogwarts itself seemed to hold its breath, poised between the exhaustion of exams and the promise of a hard-won holiday. Snow had fallen overnight, transforming the grounds into a winter wonderland. Hagrid's hut, dusted with a layer of powdered white, looked for all the world like a giant gingerbread house. Over at Castrubsha, the great redwoods bore thick blankets of snow, their branches sagging under the weight and sparkling like living Christmas trees. Even the Durmstrang ship was encrusted in ice, its hull smooth and translucent, the rigging draped in hoarfrost that caught the sunlight like a veil of diamonds. Despite the third-year students' teachers heaping on holiday homework, Harry had no intention of opening a single textbook once the term ended. He wasn't some new model of Gryffindor, and certainly not a Hufflepuff. He simply believed, as most did, that the week before Christmas was strictly for fun. More than that, Harry's heart was set on dancing. Ever since Professor McGonagall had announced the school's winter ball, he'd barely stopped practicing. By now, everyone seemed to know that Harry and Ginny would be Hogwarts' lead dance partners. Harry suspected the rumor had leaked from one of Terry Boot's friends. To ensure the school's reputation stayed untarnished, every self-styled dance master at Hogwarts had come forward, eager to offer unsolicited lessons and advice. This chapter isn't over yet. Turn the page to see what festive surprises await. What was even more absurd was how professional they'd become. As Lane casually pointed out, pausing time to stuff pro-level dance moves into your head, it's a piece of cake. Harry had wanted to refuse their coaching, but in the end he relented, wearing nothing but a mask of agony. And even when he tried to rest, peace remained elusive. After the last individual match, Fred and George swooped down over the stadium in one of their trademark flying armchairs, hollering and handing out flyers. Their joke shop empire was booming. Canary biscuits and fat-tongued toffees had become the hottest pranks at school. Within the first couple of days of the holiday, reports rolled in of students suddenly sprouting feathers from head to toe, or their tongues swelling to ridiculous proportions just shy of cutting off their air supply. Meanwhile, Harry, now firmly established as Ravenclaw's golden boy, found himself besieged with snacks in the common room, congratulatory cakes, celebratory pastries, you name it. He'd have to learn to be extremely cautious about accepting any treats. After all, one innocent-looking cookie could contain a canary biscuit in disguise, and a harmless cup of hot tea might hold a melted fat-tongued toffee that would leave him tongue-tied, literally. Chapter X, The Unluckiest Snack. Ron had the worst luck. Somehow, every time Fred and George Weasley targeted Harry with their latest joke snacks, Ron, being Ron, ended up eating them himself. He'd shrug off the twins' warnings, only to spend the next hour regretting it. Meanwhile, Fred and George were hard at work in their joke shop's workshop, cooking up new prank products. They were so confident in their inventions that they'd already applied for patents at the Joke Products Patent Office. Their new rule was simple. If a snack wasn't loaded with canary cream biscuits, or a drink wasn't infused with fat-tongued toffee, you weren't allowed to touch it. That meant that even during Ron's rare day off from grueling dance rehearsals, his only allowable treats were those stamped with the twins' seal of comedic approval. One wrong bite of anything else, and he'd be in for another round of gags, sticky tongues, exploding fizz, you name it. Oh, and on a completely unrelated note, I've got another COVID-19 test scheduled this morning. The next chapter will be up later, so stay tuned. Chapter 209, Dobby's Gift. Harry had taken to exploring the castle at every opportunity, and he was only now discovering how magical Hogwarts could be at Christmas time. Everywhere he looked, the corridors were strung with twinkling lights and swags of ribbon in red, green, and gold. Along the marble staircases, The railings were encrusted with frosty icicles that never melted, and in the great hall, 12 towering Christmas trees stood draped in every imaginable ornament, shining holly berries, shimmering baubles, and on each tree a live golden owl perched and hooted softly as students passed by. Even the suits of armor had been enchanted to join in the festivities. Whenever someone walked past, a helmet would suddenly belt out a carol, often to comic effect. Harry once heard an empty breastplate begin, "O come, ye faithful, joyful and triumphant," only to trail off mid-verse. It turned out that Peeves the poltergeist loved to hide inside and finish the songs for himself, substituting his own famously crude lyrics whenever the armor fell silent. More than once, Filch had to haul Peeves out of helmet and greaves to put an end to the obscene improvements. For Harry, it was all both hilarious and oddly heartwarming. He was usually too cautious, or simply too busy, to come close to Peeves, so spotting the poltergeist, or sensing his absence, was a rare treat. This morning, as Harry strolled through a festively adorned corridor, he found himself listening for Peeves's mischief, only to realize the prankster spirit was nowhere to be felt. It struck Harry as strange. If not Peeves, then what, or who, might be planning surprises for Christmas at Hogwarts? Ryan moved silently down the corridor, eyes fixed on the suit of armor Peeves had cunningly hidden behind a tapestry. Gathering his nerve, he edged closer, until his face hovered just inches from the visor. At that moment, Peeves exploded into a delayed scream of outrage and vanished in a cloud of brimstone. The armor lurched sideways and crashed onto the flagstones. Greaves, gauntlets, and plates clattered in a chaotic heap. For a heartbeat, the pieces lay motionless. Then, with an eerie choreography, they began to clink and clank, each segment sliding back into place until the suit stood whole once more. Ryan watched, fascination and unease warring in his chest. A troubling thought flickered through his mind. Was Harry Potter under Ron's influence? Here he was, in a school alive with extraordinary talent. Seekers on the Quidditch pitch, dancers who could fill the Great Hall with grace, and none of them suspected a thing. Not even Harry, who usually spotted magic a mile off, had connected the dots. It felt like a cruel joke. Someone was pulling strings from the shadows, and there seemed to be no risk of ever getting caught. Ryan found himself wishing for the moment of truth, when everyone would discover that he was the prank's architect. Only then might his existence carry weight instead of fading into the background. A soft shuffle interrupted his thoughts. Dobby, the house elf, peered nervously around the doorway. Since Ryan's arrival at Hogwarts, Dobby had stayed well clear of this wing. Now the little elf stared with wide, uncertain eyes. "Dobby!" Harry's voice rang out in surprise. He toppled off the top of his four-poster bed in a tangle of blankets. In that instant, something inside Ryan snapped. A genuine, echoing laugh burst from him, free and unbridled. The clang of the reassembled armor and Harry's indignant calls filled the corridor, but there was no one else to witness it. For the first time in weeks, Ryan felt truly present. Harry's heart thundered as he sat bolt upright, one hand clutching the bedpost. Before him knelt Dobby the house elf, eyes wide with panic. "Dobby is sorry, sir," the elf quivered. He took a small step forward, then froze, as if unworthy to touch the famous Harry Potter. "Dobby only wanted to wish Harry Potter a Merry Christmas, and to bring him a gift, sir." His large speckled nose wrinkled as he hurried on. "Mr. Potter said Dobby old visit any time, sir." Harry blinked, the fog of sleep clearing. "Right, of course. It is Christmas." He shook his head, and when he opened his eyes again, Dobby's huge green orbs, like marbles, stared back at him, pencil-thin nose prominent, bat-like ears twitching. Startled, Harry lost his footing and tumbled out of bed onto the floor. Dazed, he glanced down at a neat stack of brightly wrapped packages piled at the foot of the four-poster. Pulling back the velvet curtains, he reached for his glasses on the bedside table and perched them on his nose. Despite Dobby's urgent pleas and Harry's own shouting, none of his dormmates stirred. Ron, Neville, Anthony, Michael, and Terry lay fast asleep. With his hair in wild disarray and spectacles slightly askew, Harry looked back at the trembling elf. "Is it really you?" Dobby's eyes shone. "Yes, sir. Dobby lives to serve and to celebrate, sir." A small smile tugged at Harry's lips. "Well then, let's see what you've brought." Harry could hardly believe his eyes. Dobby the house elf, who had once stood before him in nothing more than a tea towel stitched with the Hogwarts crest, now looked like a walking curiosity shop. At first glance, the elf was unrecognizable. Perched on his head was a woolly teapot, cozy festooned with dozens of colorful pins and badges. Across his bare chest hung a silk tie patterned with little horseshoes, knotted carelessly under his chin. Below, he wore what looked like a pair of children's football shorts, wildly out of scale with his tiny frame. On his feet were two utterly unmatched socks, one black and green striped, Dobby's cherished freedom gift from Draco Malfoy, and the other a riot of pink and orange bands. Harry flinched back to the last time he'd seen Dobby, summoned by a hasty mention of Grindelwald. Then, the elf had been much more modestly dressed, just that Hogwarts tea towel, and he'd spent half the encounter fretting over whether Dumbledore paid him properly. In Dobby's memory, he'd been guaranteed a golden galleon each week. But that was not why today's outfit was so bizarre. What Harry didn't know was that Dobby had been parading this eccentric wardrobe for some time. In fact, when he'd first appeared before Tom Riddle, he'd been clad in exactly the same ensemble. Riddle had been so scandalized by the elf's appearance, and perhaps his brazen self-confidence, that he'd stormed off to Dumbledore to protest Dobby's very status as a Hogwarts-bound house elf. Now as Dobby stood before him, joyous and perfectly at ease in his mismatched finery, Harry realized this was simply the elf's new normal. And however strange it might look, Dobby seemed happier than ever. Harry shook his head with a rueful smile. If it weren't for his indignation the other day, Dobby might still be wandering around in a tea towel. Dobby, however, hadn't noticed Harry's confusion, only that he'd scared his friend. Bad Dobby, he wailed, clutching his arms and trembling. Dobby made Harry Potter confused. Dobby is bad. He opened his mouth to punish himself, but remembered the orders of his former masters, Draco, Harry, Dumbledore, and the others, who forbade any such self-flagellation. Harry reached out, gently tapping Dobby on the shoulder. I'm awake now, he said. It's okay. Next time, just tap me. Don't lean over and stare like that. Dobby's great eyes filled with tears as he nodded so vigorously his little tea towel cloak fluttered. Harry Potter allowed Dobby to touch his noble body. How kind, how generous. Dobby exclaimed, voice quivering. Only Master Malfoy has ever been so merciful to Dobby. Okay, Harry interjected before Dobby could go on. He was already feeling a shiver of embarrassment. Dobby, I actually have a gift for you. Dobby's face lit up at once, hope and excitement sparkling in his eyes. His makeshift outfit evidently had given Harry the perfect idea. Harry reached under his bed and pulled out the small bag Lucius Malfoy had slipped him, its fabric subtly expanded by a traceless stretching charm. Inside lay a brand new pair of socks, just what every house elf dreams of finding, and Dobby's eyes practically danced with delight. Still, the elf reminded himself of his mission. May Dobby present his gift to Harry Potter, sir? He asked in a high, hopeful squeak. By all means, Harry replied, smiling. Dobby pressed a second package into his hands. Harry peeled back the wrapping to reveal two more socks, only these were unmistakably unique. One was a crisp sky blue, the other a burnished bronze. The blue bore an embroidered eagle in mid-sole, the bronze a perfectly stitched broomstick. Dobby knitted them himself, sir, the elf announced proudly, chest puffed out. He even bought the wool with his own wages. But, sir, were you tricked? Why did the shop send two different colors? Harry laughed softly as he pulled on the mismatched pair. I think they figured I'd appreciate a bit of variety. He wiggled his toes appreciatively. Thank you, Dobby. And by the way, dinner tonight was extraordinary. Pride, and something almost like tears, shone in the elf's eyes. He hastily dabbed at them. Dobby is honored, sir, but he must hurry. Christmas feast preparations in the kitchen wait for no house elf. With a final, grateful bow, Dobby scampered off in search of his next task. Chapter 653, Ryan's Gifts and Transformations. While Harry and Dobby lingered in conversation about their own presents, Ryan realized he'd become little more than a spectator. He turned his attention to the pile of gifts beside his four-poster bed and began examining each one in turn. Hermione had pressed into his hands a hefty volume titled The Importance of Devotion in Human Sexual Relationships. Its embossed cover promised an in-depth exploration of intimacy and trust, complete with practical tips, psychological insights, and the occasional charming anecdote. Luna's gift was a simple-looking pouch of roasted gurdy root tea. The powdered roots gave off an earthy, subtly sweet aroma, exactly the sort of comforting concoction Luna would approve. Furong's offering was more personal, a pair of men's pajamas woven from a gauzy, silken fabric that seemed to shift like smoke in candlelight. Small runic charms were stitched into the hem, allowing the wearer to release delicate scents, jasmine, sandalwood, vanilla, simply by raising or lowering their body temperature. From Kate came a glossy travel voucher for two, issued by a discreet agency called Mysterium Journeys. The voucher was redeemable for a springtime trip to the United States, specifically the afternoon of April 4th, the day after Easter. Finally, there was Penello's gift, undoubtedly the oddest of the lot. It looked like a slender hardback covered in curling script, yet every page lay blank when he opened it. Tucked inside was a fragile bookmark inscribed with instructions. Tear out any page, and it would fold itself into an envelope, complete with a blank sheet of parchment ready for use. Knowing Penello's love of arcane curiosities, Ryan couldn't help but smile. He gathered up the pile of gifts, each one a reflection of its giver's personality, and settled back against the pillows, already eager to explore every last enchantment. I haven't summoned the castle door in ages, Ryan thought as he held out his right hand. With a low, mournful creak that only he could hear, the heavy wooden portal from Smith Castle slid into view inside Ravenclaw Tower. The door to his quarters swung open, and the 5 parcels he just received floated off the small table and clattered into the cupboard in the corner. Bang, 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 bang! They rattled against the shelves, but no one came. Then, as quietly as it had arrived, the door dissolved back into thin air. He turned back to his other gifts. The most intriguing was from Professor Snape. Aware of Ryan's struggles with potions, Snape had sent him a thick, leather-bound notebook filled with years' worth of detailed brewing notes and experimental recipes. It was, without doubt, Snape's finest work. The remaining presents, from Harry, Ron, Neville, and Hagrid, were pleasant enough, but not particularly remarkable. Still, Ryan knew that a gift's true value lay in its thoughtfulness. To express his gratitude, he'd prepared something special of his own. He placed a neatly wrapped volume in front of Harry. On the principles of trace silk and screening methods, he said with a small smile, "I thought you might find it useful." Easter was fast approaching, and Harry was busy readying himself for the biggest undertaking of his life. To keep the Ministry of Magic completely in the dark, he had to cover every angle. Little Hangleton was still officially logged as a wizarding settlement, but its lone magical family, the Gaunts, had long since vanished. Magical activity there hardly ever raised an alarm, and Harry's own status as a minor made him even less likely to draw scrutiny. Still, he refused to leave anything to chance. First, there was Ron. Harry had managed to get his hands on a prototype Doraemon gadget, brand new, not due for public release. With its advanced functions, Ron would have exactly the tools he needed without tipping off any snooping ministry agents. Next came Neville. For him, Harry sent a single-use parchment spell that would self-incinerate the moment it was read, leaving no trace behind. Its incantation was a dark absorption charm, designed to draw curses, black magic auras, and even poisons out of a victim, and transfer them to the caster. In inexperienced hands, it would be suicidal. But Neville, who'd mastered the demon-slaying sword techniques and undergone extensive body transformation training, would treat it like a whetstone, a brutal but effective way to sharpen his defenses. And then there was Hagrid. For the Keeper of Keys and Grounds, Harry asked his friend Ryan simply to deliver a small, heartfelt gift. No complex magic required, just something sincere. With each present carefully prepared and discreetly dispatched, Harry tucked the last item into his cloak. By Easter dawn, his friends would be armed with precisely what they needed, and the ministry would remain blissfully unaware. Hagrid had outdone himself that Christmas. Word was he'd brought a Ukrainian iron-bellied dragon egg up from Romania, no mean feat, even for the Keeper of Keys and Grounds, and unofficial Lord of the Forbidden Forest. Unlike the first-year debacle, when he'd secreted a newly hatched Charmander into the castle to keep Harry company, this time Hagrid promised to tame the dragonling himself and hide it deep among the ancient oaks, well beyond anyone's notice unless he chose to show it off. At precisely 9 o'clock, the Gryffindor dormitory exploded into Christmas cheers. Harry, curled beneath his quilt, was jolted awake by Ron's triumphant shout. "Brilliant! Ryan gave me the unpublished volume of Doraemon." "I've been after this for ages," Seamus added, already flipping through the glossy pages. Rubbing the sleep from his eyes, Harry sat up under a cascade of morning light filtering through the narrow tower window. Wrappings in every shade of red and gold littered the room. His friends were leaning over piles of presents, ecstatic and chattering all at once. Even Fred and George's matching grins shone brighter than their latest fireworks catalog. Harry peeled back his covers to reveal the mismatched socks Dobby had knitted. One emerald green, one bright crimson. He laughed and slid his feet into them, then scrambled out of bed. He'd arranged his own stack of gifts at the foot of his mattress, but had waited until everyone woke before opening so he could share in their excitement. He untied the ribbon on the first package. Dean's looping handwriting sprawled across the tag. Inside lay a flawless set of collectible Quidditch cards, each depicting a legendary seeker's greatest snatch. Harry's grin widened. "These are perfect, thank you, Dean." Dean beamed back, brandishing the slim wooden broom handle Harry had whittled for him. Neville held up a pair of cozy plant print pajamas from his grandmother. Seamus revealed a handful of Fred and George's newest dung bombs. All around, the boys compared gifts, swapped sweets, and laughed until their stomachs ached. Outside, the Forbidden Forest lay hushed under winter's pale sky. Somewhere among the towering trunks, Hagrid's dragon egg, warm and humming with magic, rested among the tangled roots of an ancient oak. But for now, at Hogwarts, it was Christmas morning, and nothing could dampen the cheerful chaos in the Gryffindor dormitory. Harry peered at the book in his hands. "So this is what Ryan gave you, Advanced Training of the Flying Curse." Ron's mouth opened and closed. "Right, I'm pretty sure Ryan also learned that flying spell Crumb and I showed him." Harry blinked. Suddenly, the leather-bound volume felt conspicuous in his grip, as if everyone in the common room could see it for the first time. Neville, who'd already ripped open his own gift from Ryan, let out a delighted whoop. A burst of orange sparks shot up, and when the smoke cleared, all that was left in Neville's hand was a pile of smoldering ash drifting toward the grate. Neville grinned. "Wait, Ryan? I didn't get him anything." Ron shifted on the couch. "Where did he go?" "Off to Beauxbaton this morning," Anthony answered. "He's dancing with Miss Delacour at the ball. Lucky fellow." Terry and Michael groaned. "So unfair." Hay chorused. Harry forced a laugh, hid his surprise, and shot Ron a quick wink. He'd assumed Ryan was a ghost to the rest of the house, an outsider no one noticed, and yet here were his dorm mates, talking about him as if he'd always been part of their circle. They remembered Ryan. They cared. And suddenly Harry realized he ought to do the same. None of them had recognized Ryan's face. If they had, they wouldn't be so surprised, or so quick to complain, that he'd ended up as Fleur's dance partner. They ought to be delighted that Fleur had snagged someone as handsome as Ryan. It was quite the revelation. Once Harry had retrieved the latest hand-knit Weasley sweater, Mrs. Weasley's annual request, and slipped it on, he hurried down from the Gryffindor dormitory with Ron and Neville. They ran into Ginny in the common room and together made their way to breakfast, all of them buzzing about Ryan. "What? Ryan actually asked that vixen to dance? That's totally unfair to Luna." Ginny's cheeks flamed as she finished her toast and strode across the threshold of the great hall. Harry was just about to point out that Hermione had even more reason to feel slighted, but common sense told him to keep his mouth shut. Instead, he peered out into the castle courtyard. A fresh blanket of snow lay undisturbed, its surface waiting for new footprints. When the students from Durmstrang, Beauxbaton, and Castrumbush finally trudged back toward the castle, the only sign of their passing was a single, deep footprint pressed into the fresh snow. Harry paused, taking in the silent expanse, then, almost on a whim, turned to his friends. "How about we have a snowball fight?" Ginny's eyes went wide with disbelief. "A snowball fight? Right now? Don't you have any—" She stopped herself, glaring at Harry. "Have you no conscience? Luna's already been through enough." Then Ginny whirled to face Ron. "And you, what are you staring at? Have you seen Ryan anywhere? I need to talk to him." Harry and Neville exchanged a quick look. Some battles are better left to big brothers. They fell silent. Chapter 211, Before the Dance. Early that morning, an unsettling discovery rippled through Hogwarts. Ryan's gone. He vanished sometime before dawn. Don't ask me, snapped one voice. What if Luna had something to do with this? Another whispered. We need to find him, now. For nearly 3 minutes, Harry, Ron, Neville, and Ginny stood in tense silence. Then Ron finally broke down. Without another word, the four of them fanned out through the castle, searching every corridor and common room. But it was as if Ryan Smith had never existed. No cloak discarded in a corner, no footprints in the dust, nothing. Even more baffling, there was no trace of Luna Lovegood or Hermione Granger either, although only Harry and his friends had ever known Ryan. To their mounting alarm, Penelope Clearwater, the current Student Union president, and Katie Bell were missing as well. Back in the Great Hall, Harry caught Ginny's anxious look and decided to keep quiet. He didn't want to worry her further. Instead, they joined the rest of the students at a grand lunchtime feast. Over 100 roast turkeys, towering piles of Christmas pudding, and mountains of cribbage wizard shortbread cookies. The aromatics of roasting meat and sweet spices filled the hall, but none of it lifted their spirits. Normally, Ron would cheerfully demolish a plate of shortbread before breakfast, yet today he poked at his pudding listlessly, eyes darting toward the entrance as if expecting news at any moment. Harry swallowed a mouthful of turkey, forced a smile, and met Ron's gaze. Let's not give up, he said softly. We'll find them, wherever they are. But even as the words left his lips, a chill ran down his spine. Who, or what, had whisked half the castle from under their noses? And how could anyone erase all evidence of their passage through Hogwarts? The dance they had looked forward to now loomed ominously on the horizon, and the questions swirling in Harry's mind promised that the night ahead would be far more dangerous than any dance. Harry could practically hear Ron's gears grinding as he made his way toward the exit of the Great Hall. All he wanted was to get back to the Ravenclaw common room and collapse. But just as Ron reached the portrait hole, Lavender Brown and Hannah Abbott swept in, determined to drag him off to, presumably, a lengthy beauty ritual. Harry watched them herd Ron away, patches of exhaustion still visible on his friend's face. Left alone at the Ravenclaw table, Harry and Ginny exchanged a resigned look. Ginny forced a smile. Well, shall we get our dance practice in before the ball tonight? Harry nodded. They gathered their things and slipped out together, heading for the practice studio. An hour later, they finished their final turn around the room. Harry straightened his posture, and Ginny brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. The clock on the wall glowed 5 in red digits. I'm starving, Harry admitted. Shall we go back for tea? They made their way toward the Great Hall, only to come to a halt when they heard Ron's high-pitched protest. No Christmas tea? What do you mean, no tea? I barely had anything for lunch. Harry and Ginny approached just in time to catch Lavender's explanation, practiced and calm. There's going to be a dance tonight instead of the usual Christmas tea. It's already 5 o'clock, so Ron, why don't you head back to the common room and change into your dress robes? Hannah and I need to get ready too. See you there. Ron blinked. You need 3 hours to get ready? Before Lavender could answer, Ginny strode forward, suddenly fierce. She pulled a tiny mirror from her robes and examined her reflection with resolute intensity. 3 hours, huh? Fine. But I can't let that vixen steal the show tonight. I'm going to make Luna choose me again. Harry wasn't sure who the rival was, but he suppressed a grin. Ginny might be fiery, but that's one thing he loved about her. They all turned and headed back to Ravenclaw Tower, each with their own thoughts of victory, whether on the dance floor or in matters of the heart. Ginny gave Harry a quick, playful kiss. I'm off now. Be waiting for me in the lounge. With Lavender at her side, she melted into the bustling crowd. Hannah flashed Neville a smile, waved goodbye, and followed them. At the same moment, several other girls overheard the exchange and hurried off toward the Gryffindor girls' dormitory. Though Ginny hadn't named anyone explicitly, everyone knew whom she was talking about. The Beauxbatons, champion who'd stolen the spotlight at Hogwarts, Fleur Delacour. Nearby, Ron nudged Harry. They're all insane, honestly, he muttered. No amount of makeup or beauty potion can compare with Fleur. Harry laughed. I could bathe in Pomfrey's Everbloom perfume and still come in second. Neville rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Maybe they just can't stand losing, especially not to a foreign champion. Back in the common room, the change was striking. The familiar black and green cloaks had been set aside for vibrant dress robes in every hue. Harry, Ron, Neville, and Dean slipped up to the dormitory to change. When they regrouped in the lounge, Harry was wearing the gleaming silver robes Draco had given him, perfectly polished and ready for tonight's ball. Ron slipped into a deep green, dragon-hide cloak that fell like a robe, while Neville kept things simple, a plain blue robe with subtle, dark blue stripes. They shifted impatiently in the Gryffindor common room, waiting for Ginny and her friends. At last, Ginny appeared in the doorway, flanked by Lavender Brown and Hannah Abbott, both looking more than a little reluctant to leave their dorms. Lavender immediately began to complain. I just got a proper look at the Ravenclaw girls' dorm. Why the rush? Hannah chimed in. It's nothing like Gryffindor, so refined, so perfect for a girl's study. I quite loved it. Lavender sighed. If only it weren't so chilly. Otherwise, it's ideal. The cold? Hannah laughed. We Hufflepuffs have it warm and toasty down in our basement common room. Honestly, the only ones worse off are the Slytherins, right by the Black Lake. It's only bearable there in the summer. Their conversation was careening toward a full architectural critique of Hogwarts when Ron cleared his throat. All right, that's enough castle talk. Time to go. To the auditorium? Ginny gave a quick nod, already regretting her insistence on bringing Lavender and Hannah along. They really did talk nonstop. The four of them, Ron, Neville, Ginny, and their two chatty companions, filed out of the common room, hurrying down the corridors toward the next adventure. It felt as though 100 ducks were quacking in Ginny's skull. She glanced at Harry. We're supposed to lead the dance tonight. Let's get there. Now. Harry hesitated. Stepping into the foyer at this moment would draw every eye in the castle. He was already famous enough. Right now, Ginny insisted, seizing his hand and pulling him from the lounge. They threaded their way toward the foyer, which was packed with students. Everyone milled about, hoping to find their dance partners before the auditorium doors opened at 8 o'clock. Some darted through the crowd, calling names. Others simply waited anxiously. As Harry and Ginny appeared, conversation trailed off. Heads turned, all eyes fixed on them. Even if Victor Krum and his date had just arrived, they would not have caused such a stir. Harry felt heat flood his cheeks, but before he could sink into embarrassment, the entire foyer fell utterly silent. Ginny's low curse confirmed her worst fear. Bloody hell! It must be Fleur Delacour. Yet the hush that swept over the crowd told them something different was coming. A deep, echoing footstep sounded beyond the double doors, slow and deliberate. The students inside held their breath. I should have known, Ginny murmured, tightening her grip on Harry's hand. Then, with a long, creaking groan, the doors began to open. Chapter X, The Radiant Stranger. I want to break up! The shout rang out across the courtyard, halting the afternoon bustle in an instant. A dozen students turned toward the speaker, a pale girl clutching her chest, eyes wide with shock. Who is he? She gasped. He's glowing. He's like a god. She swayed, gathering her courage. Ryan Smith. That name was etched into my heart 2 years ago. How could I have ever forgotten him? A mocking voice drifted from the other side of the square. Could you really erase a man from your memory? Two boys seized the nearest freshman, Zacharias, and roughly shoved him to the ground. Come on, tell us, one jeered. Do you know him? Trembling, Zacharias shook his head. The courtyard fell silent. Everyone recognized the newcomer. Harry felt his heart seize in his chest. He'd heard the stories, but nothing prepared him for this moment. Under the late afternoon sun, Ryan Smith stood motionless, every movement effortless, every feature perfectly sculpted. His presence alone seemed to steal the air from the courtyard. Even Ginny, who had been gearing up to defend Luna, was transfixed. At first, she tried to rally herself, to step forward and speak for her friend. But the sight of Ryan was disarming. Her cheeks flamed, her breath caught, and suddenly she was tumbling forward, collapsing against Harry's side. So this is him, she whispered, voice trembling. Luna, no, stop it! I'm engaged! Panic edged her words as she buried her face in Harry's arms, as if hiding could shield her from Ryan's impossible allure. Not a single other voice dared to break the hush that followed. In that moment, everyone in the courtyard understood. Ryan Smith had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 655, Friendship Deteriorates. Closing the distance, except for Ginny, every witch who was happily attached and possessed of strong willpower managed to keep herself in check. Ryan, however, felt a wave of awkwardness wash over him. So many familiar faces stood among these confident women, unafraid even to meet his gaze. Everyone knew that Kate kept meticulous tabs on everything, and that the shadows she borrowed came from a vast, well-connected network. Given her current power, Ryan dared not claim he'd never crossed paths in one way or another with any of these witches. Of course, those encounters had never gone beyond the casual or incidental. Still, there were two sisters in particular he recognized more clearly than the rest, the Montgomery twins. Kate delighted in keeping him guessing as to whose likeness she borrowed for her latest guise, and always made sure it was someone breathtakingly beautiful. Only Padma and Parvati fit that description. Second-year Gryffindors, the elegant twins had even appeared briefly in the original timeline, back in Harry's 6th year, when their younger brother suffered a werewolf's bite at the hands of Fenrir Greyback. Ryan swallowed, steeling himself. As these friendships began to fray under the weight of secrets and shifting loyalties, he knew the Montgomery twins would play their part, whether he was ready for it or not. Because their mother had refused to aid the Death Eaters, her youngest son, only 5 years old, had died of his wounds in St. Mungo's hospital. The grief of that loss weighed on Ryan every day. The other memory Ryan carried was of Angelina Jensen. She wasn't the pale, delicate type Hollywood tends to favor. Angelina was black, tall and athletic, built with just the right amount of lean muscle. As a chaser for the Holyhead Harpies, she radiated a different kind of beauty. Strong, healthy, utterly alive. Ryan had even seen her take the field in her alternate Kate persona, an audacious spirit who thrilled him in ways he'd never anticipated. By contrast, Hannah Abbott, Pansy Parkinson, and Ginny Weasley simply didn't appeal to him. Their features and temperaments didn't stir his heart the way Angelina's did. Ryan caught himself as his thoughts began to wander into impure territory, and he forced them back into check, determined not to slip into obscenity. Meanwhile, Harry watched Ryan with astonishment. He had seen many powerful wizards, and many of Dumbledore's carefully chosen protégés, but none had ever struck him quite like Ryan did in that moment. Harry felt his pulse quicken. As he studied Ryan's serene confidence, he finally grasped what Dumbledore had seen in him. If a task was impossible, Ryan was the one best suited to attempt it. Ryan himself seemed unaware of the awe he inspired. He wore a simple silver-gray satin robe, its understated elegance accentuating rather than hiding his features. His skin was the color of translucent white jade, neither sickly nor overly pale, but luminous and perfectly clear. Even in stillness, Ryan looked like someone carved from precious stone, a reminder that sometimes beauty and strength walk hand in hand. The light caught him in an arresting way, his eyes so pale they seemed almost white, yet on his face they were perfectly in balance, like a brilliant moon suspended in a dark sky. His hair, a deep obsidian black, absorbed every ray of light, setting off the luminescence of his skin and eyes. Together, it was a beauty at once striking and ineffable, neither the bold warmth of sunlight nor the quiet glow of midnight, but something pure and absolute. It was beauty itself. He walked slowly, hand in hand with Fleur, and in each step there was an otherworldly grace, like a deity descending into our realm, bringing with him the sanctity of some hidden temple. Fleur matched him in a gown of silver-gray satin, but where it had once dazzled on her alone, it now took on a softer shimmer beside him. She was still breathtaking, her smile radiant enough to hold every eye in the room, but in his presence she became like a verdant leaf at the foot of a moonlit bloom. Lovely, yes, but ultimately accentuating his light. "Harry, Harry!" A sudden clap on the shoulder yanked him back to the present. Draco's grin was mischievous, his elbow pushing into Harry's ribs. "Huh, thanks," Harry managed, swiveling his gaze away from Ryan as quickly as he could. Harry watched the dance floor with mild curiosity. Across the hall, Draco Malfoy stood out in a high-collared black velvet robe that made him look every bit the austere clergyman, if clergymen wore silver serpent brooches. Pansy Parkinson fluttered beside him in a frilly pale pink gown, clinging to his arm as if it were a life preserver. Crabbe and Goyle lurked at their elbow, both dressed head to toe in mossy greens that made them resemble oversized garden stones, and partnerless to boot. As Harry studied the quartet, Draco gave Ron a subtle shove. What caught Harry's eye wasn't Ron's stumble, but the way Ron immediately spun around and stared straight at him. "Oi, Ron Weasley, what's the big idea?" Ginny's voice rang out over the orchestra's waltz. She slipped free of Harry's arms, cheeks suddenly a vivid shade of emerald. Lavender Brown, Ron's date for the evening, looked on in thinly veiled annoyance as Ron's attention lingered on Harry rather than her. Feeling more than a little miffed, Ginny pivoted back to Harry, only to see him awkwardly edging backward, eyes still fixed on Ron. She grabbed his shoulder. "Harry, are you actually taking a step back right now?" Harry flashed her a sheepish half-smile and rested his hand lightly on her waist. "I was just—" "Don't just me," Ginny snapped, turning her glare on Ron. "And you, stop staring at him like he's the only star in the room." Ron's face went pink. He mumbled an apology to Lavender, half-heartedly vowed to focus on his partner, then hurried back into the fray. Ginny let out a breath and tucked a loose curl behind her ear. "Better?" she asked Harry. Harry nodded and drew her close again. "Much." They fell back into step, perfectly in time with the music, leaving Draco and his green-clad cronies to their own private drama, where whispered rumors about Ron and Harry's inseparable friendship, from nursery pranks to every Hogwarts extravaganza since first grade, would doubtless continue to swirl. Some found the gossip rude. To Harry, it was just another reminder of how strange and how unbreakable the bonds of friendship could be. Ron leaned against the stone wall, his jaw set in a stubborn line. He was convinced this mess was Dumbledore's fault. Yet more than anything, what stung was the memory of Harry's unconscious half-step toward him, so slight it would have gone unnoticed had someone not pointed it out. That sort of instinctive gesture couldn't be faked, and Ron knew Harry himself wasn't even aware he'd made it. "I see Professor McGonagall," Harry said abruptly, eyes brightening. "She's hosting the dance tonight." He gripped Ginny's hand and, with surprising urgency, led her through the press of nearly frantic students. Their path took them to the great front doors, which swung open on creaking hinges. Beyond lay the castle's lawn, transformed by magic into a twilit glade. Hundreds of living fairies drifted among enchanted rose bushes, their diaphanous wings glowing with soft, multicolored light. Here and there, statues of Santa Claus and his reindeer stood sentinel, their marble forms dusted with frost, an odd but delightful touch. The whole scene shimmered under a star-flecked sky, as if the very air were woven from starlight. As Harry stepped forward, he suddenly realized he was heading not only for Professor McGonagall, but also toward Ryan and the others gathered by the rose bushes. He could feel the pull of some deeper impulse guiding his feet. Moments later, his path brought him within earshot of Fleur's voice. Her rich French accent, as warm and lilting as ever, floated through the night, but it no longer set his pulse racing. Instead, he found himself strangely unmoved, his focus fixed on the company ahead of him. Fleur paused at the foot of the grand staircase, her eyes narrowing as she swept the room with a critical gaze. "This design," she announced, voice crisp, "is simply copied. Every archway of the castle and even the layout of the front lawn. I recognized it the moment I arrived, because it's exactly what I saw at your home last Christmas." All at once, Ryan stepped forward. His elegant bearing drew every eye, and even Harry found himself leaning in to catch the low, measured reply. "Or, perhaps," Ryan offered with a faint, amused smile, "you'd prefer to believe that I merely had a vision of those exact images when I first arrived, and decided to recreate them here." Harry felt a soft flutter in his chest, but didn't dare look away from Ginny. He tightened his grip on her hand, his pulse still racing from Ryan's proximity. Then Ryan's voice, rich, textured, cut through the tension like a note struck on crystal. "Goodness, Harry, you're positively glowing, red-cheeked like a porcelain teapot." Harry's heart thundered, but the unexpected coolness in Ryan's tone had a soothing effect, like a spring breeze after a scorching day. He realized he'd been leaning too far into Ginny's side, almost as if seeking refuge, and straightened up with an embarrassed chuckle. Turning back to Fleur, Ryan added with his usual composed charm, As I said, I'll dial back my embellishments. Otherwise, this Christmas ball might as well be cancelled. Besides, Professor Dumbledore will be arriving any minute now. With that, the tension in the hall eased slightly. Guests exchanged curious glances, and Harry, still warm-cheeked, took a steadying breath, aware that the evening had only just begun. Chapter 213, A True Warrior, Leon Smith. Chapter 656, The Real Warrior, Ryan Smith. Harry stood in the grand entrance hall, utterly bewildered. Whatever spell Ryan had just cast, or whatever charm he just turned off, Harry couldn't tell. Ryan still looked every bit as handsome as ever, but that magnetic pull that normally set hearts racing was gone. And yet, Harry found he no longer cared. The hushed hush that had settled over the foyer moments before abruptly gave way to renewed chatter and laughter. Professor McGonagall, who'd appeared frozen in amazement, shook her head as though rousing herself from a dream. She looked around the hall, searching for evidence of Harry and the others, as if convinced everything that had just transpired was nothing more than an illusion. But Ryan's deliberate step backward told a different story, one that had really happened. The students milling about gaped at Ryan's impeccable looks, then, quite unlike before, murmured bitterly about his new designation as Fleur's dance partner, even as they fawned over the delicate beauty of the hibiscus blooms decorating the hall. Professor McGonagall finally cleared her throat. "Warriors, if you please, step forward." She wore her crimson tartan robes, the wide hat brimmed with a prickly wreath of thistles. With a piercing gaze, she examined Harry from head to toe, assessing whether the young Gryffindor was properly attired to lead Hogwarts champions onto the floor. Harry glanced at Ryan one more time, then gave a subtle nod of approval. They'd been told to wait by the side door and let the others enter first. As soon as the auditorium quieted and every seat creaked under a settling student, they fell in line. He and Ginny stood nearest the door. Surely they'd be ushered in moments. First came Victor Krum, with that Slytherin girl who'd haunted his trail in the library. Behind them strolled Ervast Macmillan and his partner, both draped in the same bright green robes as their school uniform. Last in the procession were Fleur Delacour and her companion, whispering in French so softly no one else could catch their words. Krum leaned over and tapped Harry's shoulder. "So that, I take it, is the powerful wizard Fleur mentioned?" The Slytherin girl shot a jealous glance at Fleur, then gaped at Ryan as though he were a rare specimen. Harry couldn't resist a grin. "Actually, Potter's story's a bit off. Ryan Smith was Porter's roommate at Hogwarts. Porter's probably just worried you'll snatch Smith's dance partner." Ervast's partner laughed softly. "No, Potter's right. Ryan really is that strong. With him here, no one can predict how tonight will go." Chapter 11. A gasp from the Castrubsha girl beside me broke the hush. I turned to see what had caught her off guard, and there he was. Ryan slipped into the entrance, every inch the dazzling figure the rumors had promised, tall, poised, and impossibly handsome. I couldn't help but stare for a moment, taking in the effortless grace of his bearing. Then I shook my head, as if to clear the enchantment. My eyes drifted to Irvis, the Slytherin girl across the aisle. She offered a cold, tight-lipped smile, but said nothing. Even she had no sarcastic remark to match his charm. "It's unbelievable," Victor Krum breathed, leaning forward. "I thought he was only good-looking. I didn't realize." His voice cut off as the auditorium doors swung open. Under Professor McGonagall's calm direction, the rest of the students filed in, step by careful step. I watched Krum's Star Club members march past us, their heads high, yet I noticed the ice in their eyes as they glared at Irvis. There was something less steadfast in those looks than I'd seen before. A flicker of something else caught my attention. The pure, bone-deep envy they sent Fleur's way, followed by an almost feverish sparkle when they glanced at Ryan. My spine tingled. This was the aura of true admiration, even before Ryan had fully revealed himself. Then Ron's friendly nod snapped me back to the present. I steeled myself, deciding to set aside my misgivings. "I almost forgot," Krum said, smoothing his robes. "Once we're inside, we'll be dancing." Professor McGonagall gave me a serene smile as she passed. "Mr. Potter, try not to worry too much. Enjoy the evening." I took a steadying breath. With that gentle reassurance, I tucked my worries away and followed everyone into the glowing light of the auditorium. After the last of the feast's delicacies was cleared away, Professor McGonagall's voice drifted up behind Harry. "The dancing will begin shortly," she reminded him, her tone warm. She offered him a reassuring smile. "Professor Flitwick tells me your steps have never been better. Just relax and enjoy your turn on the floor. Now, all competitors, follow me. The audience is already seated. Please file in along the aisle." Harry and the others fell into line, trailing behind Professor McGonagall as she led them toward the front of the hall, where a large round table was set for the judges. As they entered, the audience broke into enthusiastic applause. The great hall had been utterly transformed. The walls glinted with silvery frost, the ceiling was painted like a glittering night sky, and hundreds of sprigs of mistletoe and ivy garlands dangled overhead. Gone were the 6 long house tables. In their place stood 100 small, lantern-lit tables, each seating about 10 guests. Harry felt a wave of relief wash over him when the crowd's gaze settled on Ryan. It was clear everyone expected Ryan to shine tonight. Harry and his classmates were simply there to support him. He took a steadying breath, squared his shoulders, and followed McGonagall to his spot, ready for whatever came next. As Harry shook off the last of his surprise, he realized they were already standing before the head table. Professor Dumbledore beamed at them, his eyes crinkling in welcome, then winked knowingly at Ryan and Harry. Not a trace of Grindelwald was to be seen. Gellert's absence left the hall feeling strangely off balance. And, as usual, Igor Karkaroff treated Viktor Krum with utter indifference, not even bothering to acknowledge the Durmstrang champion. On Harry's other side, Mr. Weasley, resplendent in a freshly tailored navy blue ceremonial robe, waved them over and pulled out 2 chairs beside him. Madame Maxime, who'd swapped her customary black satin for a flowing lavender gown, followed suit, sweeping an elegant hand toward Ryan and Fleur. Mrs. Volkanova, dressed in robes only subtly different from those worn by Elvis and her party, did likewise for Elvis and her friends. Before long, every seat was claimed. Every seat, that is, except one. Karkaroff ended up isolated at the far end of the table. Viktor Krum found himself next to a Slytherin girl on Dumbledore's immediate right, while Harry and Ginny settled happily beside Mr. Weasley. "Harry, Ginny, it's been too long," Mr. Weasley exclaimed, his smile as warm as ever. He immediately began peppering them with questions about their extended family. "What have you all been up to? And tell me, why hasn't Percy managed to find himself a dance partner? Oh, and who is the mystery girl dancing with Angelina next to Fred and George?" Harry exchanged a glance with Ginny, both of them chuckling. It looked like the evening was only just beginning. Ron had mentioned Lavender Brown over the holidays. Mr. Weasley had even seen a photograph of her, so when the family gathered for the first meal of term, he couldn't resist asking after his children's social lives. "Percy's in 7th year now, isn't he?" Mr. Weasley began. "He is," Ginny replied. "He's buried in revision. No time for anything else." "And Fred and George?" "Dad, you know those two. They do absolutely everything together." Mr. Weasley turned his attention to Ginny. "And Ron?" Ginny's cheeks flushed. She bit her lip, stifling a giggle, and quickly covered her mouth. Ron said nothing, only glanced at her, a faint smile playing on his lips. "He's perfectly fine," Ginny managed at last. Meanwhile, Harry couldn't help but notice that his golden charger remained conspicuously empty. Normally, house elves would whisk plate after plate through the air, but today, each place setting held a small menu card instead. Harry picked his up hesitantly and scanned it, uncertain. He glanced around just as a steaming mound of mashed potatoes materialized on Ron's plate. Catching Harry's puzzled expression, Professor Dumbledore leaned forward to study his own menu. Then, in a clear, deliberate tone, the headmaster addressed his charger. "Pork chop." Almost at once, a perfectly cooked chop appeared. A ripple of surprise and delight passed around the table as everyone realized what was happening. Wizards and witches began to pore over their menus, calling out orders that floated through the great hall on the wings of anticipation.